Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Met His Biggest Fan? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The clock on the wall let out a sound every time a second passed, marking a continuous and incessant rhythm that could get annoying when your head is trying not to explode each tick, a drop of water in the overflowing glass. Outside, in the quietest residential neighborhood he could find, it was raining torrentially with thunder and everything, as if the universe wanted to finish off his misfortunes with just that. He really hated the rain. The thunder was annoying, irritating. The rain left streaks everywhere, caused humidity, and made his knees hurt. Worse, it brought back bad memories. Leaving that aside, there were other things to think about right now, and he only realized it when his laptop screen started buzzing with an incoming video call. It didn't take him more than 3 seconds to answer. He was a little desperate about it. "Hey, nerd." His face reflected a false disinterest, as if he could hide something under that mask. And on the other side of the screen, those beautiful green eyes greeted him just like always, with a pure shine and a smile attached. He could never get tired of seeing him. "Kaken, you responded quickly." He rolled his eyes. "I was looking at other things and I accidentally pressed it." But the other boy laughed because he knew it was the worst lie in the world. He didn't know how to lie. "If you're serious, hey, I've been browsing the markets here, and look what I got." The green-haired boy held up a rather nice keychain. He'd recognize that hero suit anywhere he wore it every day for work. "It's you. Miniature, I have it on my keys." "That's too obsessive even for your nerdy fan but." A giggle. Oh, how he loved those giggles. "I think it's cute. I've been here for about a year, and it seems like quite an achievement to get merch of heroes from Japan. You've lowered your expectations and goals." "That's not true. Well, maybe, but it made me happy." "You should be happy." How could he say he wasn't happy, when it had been so long since he'd seen him beyond a FING screen? Katsuki was tired of that DMN distance he had refused to accept from the beginning. But in the end, it wasn't his FING decision. He hated every single person who took his only loved one away. Even All Might was included in that list. From that day on, everything went downhill. If Katsuki thought that when he entered UA nothing went as he wanted and that frustrated him, then he was an idiot because after the war, everything became even worse. Saving the world was shit. He would have let everyone die and rot in their misery, and that's not a good thought for a hero, thought Katsuki, scolding himself for his selfishness. But don't blame him. He'd had his words stuck in his throat for so many years. Every day he wondered how they had ended up like this with a huge ocean in between, on different continents, and a plane trip too long to ever visit each other. How they had reduced their growing friendship to a distance. Nothing was going well, and he had no idea why he felt so bad. In reality, that was a total lie. He knew it perfectly well. He had experienced it over a year ago. But his current problems went back much further. And sometimes, he went back in his memory to appreciate those days a little. The value of life. No one really knows because it's a tacit agreement. It depends on the culture of each town or country. It depends on each person and their own experiences. It's strange if you think about it. But some people learn to value the smallest things when they face death head-on and realize they don't want to die, that there are still many things to live for, and that the things they already lived through hadn't been appreciated as they should have been. It's basically what happened to Katsuki once he rose from the dead to end that stupid war against that idiot Shigaraki and All for One. He wanted to live so strongly that he didn't think about the consequences while he fought. He didn't care about losing his right arm. In the end, he achieved his goal. He was alive. Just waking up on the hospital bed, his only thought automatically went to Izuku. Where was he? Was he okay? Had he survived too? Not even the pain in his chest and muscles in general stopped him. The only thing that kept him glued to those blankets was his mother, who carefully held him against the mattress. A stupid doctor came in and ran a couple of tests, which he only paid attention to once he was assured that Izuku was fine and had been awake for days. With his mind a little calmer, hoping his parents hadn't lied to him, he let himself be examined because Dimon, It hurt even to blink. Later that day, full of serum and when his parents disappeared for a few seconds, Katsuki didn't even hesitate. He lifted his feet from the miserable bed and dragged his four-pole to walk better, searching the halls for that voice he knew or any sign of where Izuku could be. Unfortunately, what he heard to recognize where he was not ideal. "You don't have your quirk?" The only eye visible under the boy's bandages fell on Katsuki. "Kaken, no. It's not that. Explain yourself, Izuku." "Right now," he demanded, his voice broken, sad, as he approached and ignored All Might's presence in the room. "It's like the flames have subsided. It's still there, but I can't hear the carriers and I can't call out to him. The doctors say my body is focused on healing now that the adrenaline is gone." "Aren't you quirkless?" Katsuki's eyes began to fill with fear, with tears. "Not really, I just went back to square one. It feels like my dream come true anyway and in a way. Are you crying? This isn't like you." Izuku's broken voice interrupted his own storytelling when he saw his childhood friend burst into tears. And the blonde wiped his tears with the bandages on his hand. Despite the pain, it was the only thing he could do. Finally, he looked away, holding back sobs like an idiot as he spoke. "For a moment I thought you didn't have it anymore, and I was scared because I want to keep competing and all that stuff for the rest of my life." Kaken. If Izuku had healthy arms, he would have taken Katsuki's hand in his own. "Well, I was born without a quirk, so it wouldn't have changed much, but it's still there. I'll need someone to help me get strong again. And you better hurry up or I'll beat you." And in the end, with those tears on their faces, full of feelings and things that could wait to be spoken about, Katsuki knew he had to show his affection in another way. He had to stop being such a coward and idiot when it came to the only object of his love. So, sitting in front of Izuku, he gave him a clumsy hug. Neither of their limbs were okay, so he just rested his head on the other's shoulder. It wasn't the ideal time to tell him that he loved him. They had to heal from so many wounds and everything that had happened to them. They had so many other things to talk about, and this was simply more than enough. "Kaken, shut up and don't screw this up," Katsuki said, rubbing his cheek against Izuku's neck. A sob escaped the freckled boy's lips before a giggle. "I'll try not to." Even though everything seemed like shit, with Izuku there was always hope. His eyes told you that they never gave up on anything. His pure heart said he would never rest until he saved as many people as he could with his own life. No one deserved to be a hero as much as Deku. Now there was an opportunity. Katsuki was eager to see how the future would unfold. He wanted to relive Izuku's entire growth process, this time truly by his side, to help him improve the way it was always supposed to be done, being his support and his best friend as he deserved. To show Izuku his maturity and this new beautiful side of Katsuki, to fill him with the love he felt in his chest. It had taken them a while to get back to talking after that awkward hug, but All Might decided to give them a little speech about how well they had done. He thanked them for a few things, congratulated them, called them the greatest heroes, and then brought some news from outside, finally telling them they should get well soon. After that encounter, the doctors decided to separate them for medical reasons, which was disgusting for the two teenagers who just wanted to spend a little more time together, especially now that they seemed closer than ever. And them all, even though Katsuki knew Izuku was fine and awake, that wasn't enough for him. He rolled around on that stupid hospital stretcher like an idiot, unable to fall asleep. It felt like a thorn in his wrecked heart. He needed to be by Izuku's side, and he couldn't. He couldn't because of physical pain. He was barely able to move on the mattress, so he just stared at the ceiling, hurting, feeling ridiculous for being so desperate for attention. Katsuki could sum up the rest of those days as fing sheet. Empty, too quiet when he was alone, boring if anyone came to see him. The only good thing about visitors was that sometimes they brought him delicious food or snacks instead of that shitty hospital food that made his stomach hurt from how awful it was. The only moments worth having were when he secretly got up to sneak into Izuku's room and be with him for a while. At first, he felt a little pathetic for being so desperate to be with that nerd. But there was also a voice in his head telling him his whole life had been crap without Izuku, and that somehow, checking on him while they recovered showed that Katsuki had changed. He could do better. Move your butt, nerd. The blonde approached the boy's stretcher and sat next to him, painfully touching the smaller bandages from his heart surgery. The huge device that had kept him alive was gone, leaving only softer bandages to aid healing. It was easier to move around now. "Kaken, I told you not to come, you'll hurt yourself." Although he complained in whispers, Izuku moved to the side, leaving room for the blonde on the stretcher. "These beds are uncomfortable and the food's disgusting," he muttered with a scowl. "Are you better?" His tone suddenly softened. For both of them, it was a new dynamic. After the war, they had begun to get along better and understand each other, but it was still strange. Even with Katsuki's full apology speech, it was difficult for them to live together without shouting and explosions. Still, they weren't doing so bad apparently. Although there were details both kept to themselves, like Izuku's panic attack when he saw Katsuki die. Or the fact that Katsuki died thinking about Izuku. Those were minor things without importance at this moment, or at least, that's what they thought. Saying it wouldn't change anything. Their actions in the present had to change that shitty relationship they used to have. Especially now that both knew they worked better together, that their rivalry was the driving force of both their lives. For Izuku, it was crazy to have this attentive and maybe even a little protective Katsuki by his side. He was still rude, but he didn't wear that bad face or harmful aura like before. He wasn't threatening. Izuku liked seeing him like that. "A lot better. Tomorrow they're taking off my casts. How's your heart?" Suddenly the boy's voice faded, filled with pain. Logical after watching Katsuki die with his heart exploded, it surely left some kind of trauma. The thought that something could go wrong and suddenly he'd be a corpse again. "Beating," Katsuki said simply, wanting to avoid the topic. Not because he didn't care he did, but because these weren't conversations that brought anything good. "When are you going to tell him you love him?" a little voice in the back of his head screamed. It wasn't the ideal time. They had wounds to heal, a world to rebuild, a future to care for, and many other things to think about. It should be enough to stay there by his side even on the worst nights in the hospital, then support him in UA training, later join an agency together, and make sure Izuku was still alive while they worked side by side. Was it too much? Excessive? Compulsive? Katsuki was like that. He wanted everything under his control. The things that mattered most had to go his way so everything would be perfect. Then Izuku snapped him out of his thoughts. "I'm glad you're okay. For a moment when I saw you fighting with Shigara. There's no point in talking about that sheet, Izuku. But it was terrible." Katsuki stopped himself from rolling his eyes and simply adjusted himself better on the stretcher, cast and all. He still preferred the discomfort to being alone in his room. It was. Leave it behind and get over it. It might seem cruel if you didn't know how to read Katsuki. Anyone else would interpret it as devaluing Izuku's feelings. But this idiot did understand his childhood friend. He knew those words hid a "don't be bitter if I'm already fine" to spare further pain. "You're right. We're here, that's what matters," Izuku sighed, closing his eyes and leaning his bandaged head against the wall. Katsuki muttered something like an before glancing at the boy beside him. The peace of being like this, together, was perfect. Nothing could happen to them right now. Maybe it was because Katsuki kept nurturing those feelings of appreciation in his chest. And since it wasn't hard to admit it to himself, well, he loved Izuku. Having him close was a comfort. Even silence wasn't uncomfortable. Where was the violence of the past? He didn't think he was worthy of Izuku's divine forgiveness, of his extreme kindness. The nerdy idiot would probably have forgiven Shigaraki if he showed even a shred of wanting to be better. That said a lot about him. But anyway, Katsuki still carried his own prejudices against himself. It wasn't heroic to incite him to suicide. It wasn't heroic to bully him for years. Nothing Katsuki did to Izuku for over a decade was heroic, and yet he was still called a hero. And the person he loved most admired him. What was the point of that? "How long do you think it'll take us to return to school?" The question pulled him out of his reverie. "What do I know, nerd? I'm trying to make conversation, Kaken." "No need. I appreciate your closed mouth." Izuku made a disgusted noise in his throat. "How mean." Katsuki sighed, looking out the window at the brightly lit streets of downtown. Even during the day there was little movement, most of it heroes or construction workers trying to rebuild the city as fast as possible. A few months, Katsuki said calmly. UA is always safe and didn't suffer much damage. They're more worried about the city. There must be villains and criminals on every corner. The BSTRDS are taking advantage of the riot to screw people over by robbing stores and supermarkets. But it's not your FNG problem. Izuku let out a chuckle that made his stomach hurt from his injuries. I know, Kaken. I just wish I could help. How are you going to help with 2 casts on your arms, idiot? I'll think of something. DMN complacent. What does that even mean? Izuku laughed, this new dynamic with the blonde entertaining jokes and nonsense without importance. It refreshed both their minds. Katsuki laughed too. What does complacent mean, your brain messed up? Maybe. Since you were born. You're still mean. You're still a nerd. They'd become more idiotic now that they could be considered friends. But what would they be without their bickering? The level had dropped to nonsense without real harm done, and that brought them more normalcy than anything. After all they'd experienced, that's what they needed, normalcy. Although it wasn't exactly normal for them to share a bed during some of those hospital nights. I mean, they did it once as children. But here's the thing, they were children. Since Katsuki ruined their relationship by rejecting Izuku's friendship, they hadn't had many interactions like that at most during the Class 1A training camp, a mission trip, but never with the privacy of being truly alone. That taboo wasn't even important now. When tiredness weighed down their eyes, when conversations led nowhere because of sleep, and they ended up leaning on each other's shoulders to doze off, it felt normal. They'd been through so much together that it didn't even feel weird anymore. They'd been scolded for it several times, but they couldn't help it. Hospital nights were boring and depressing, so they ignored the authority. As their health improved, they were included in daily activities like physiotherapy. For the kids who had recovered their arms, it was basically a miracle. The best thing was to do what the doctors said, which worked. It only took 5 days for Katsuki to move his right arm freely. As for Izuku, though in some ways he was in better condition than Katsuki, he had more complications with his arms. They'd always been in bad shape. The idiot had never cared for them properly, so now it was taking its toll. Katsuki wouldn't let that slide. That's because you were useless and kept breaking your arms. I was trying to use a quirk that wasn't mine. You would have learned faster. Izuku looked at him in disbelief before laughing. If I could go back in time. If you went back in time, you'd better fix other things. We were talking about my arms. Katsuki snapped. The idiot didn't get that he was talking about their relationship. Anyway, it didn't matter. He was the one who ruined it, not Izuku. Well, if I could go back in DMN time. Nah, everything was as it should be. In the end, all's well that ends well. That made absolutely no sense to Katsuki. So it was okay to have been an a-hole as long as they ended up friends? Bullshit. But that was Izuku's compassion always in the way. He'd always been like that, even as a child, and even after everything he'd lived through. Katsuki felt better thinking he was working on deserving that forgiveness. So time passed recapitulating, improving, believing that right now he could be his best version, or try to be. But the nerd didn't make it easy for him. Not when, the day after that talk in physiotherapy, when he went to see him, Izuku was without bandages on his head. Katsuki was forced to put a hand in front of his lips, trying not to burst out laughing. Go ahead, laugh, Izuku said, running his hand down the side of his shaved head. Katsuki shook his head, looking away. It's not that bad. You're a terrible liar, Kaken. Right now the one laughing was Izuku. He knew hair grew, and he had to appreciate that he was alive. Laughter healed the soul. Better than whining like an idiot over something that would soon recover. Then Katsuki approached him and laughed more up close, unable to keep his hands still as he touched the hair, moving Izuku's head to see better. I hope it grows fast. The scar back here is horrible, he said, holding back laughter. I hope it grows by the time we return to UA. I'm sorry, it's so funny, Katsuki said, laughing in his face. He couldn't take him seriously like that, and Izuku pouted. You're going to pay for this. We'll see, nerd, he said, pulling out his phone and snapping a picture that would be saved forever in his gallery. The reason? He wanted something to laugh at from time to time. That was the blonde's last day in the hospital. He was passing by Izuku's room to say goodbye, but got caught up in that strange hair moment. In the end, it wasn't complicated for them to say goodbye. Izuku assured him they'd get together before classes started again. A new opportunity in life was beginning. Now that he had found value in his life, a true goal, he understood how much he wanted to live. He wanted to achieve many things. He still hadn't reached Izuku's level of heroism for many reasons, and he would never give up until he truly surpassed how great his rival was. It wasn't just about winning more battles anymore. He had a lot to learn from Izuku: his kind nature, his connection with civilians and friends, his will to save in order to win, and more. Even if he had come closer to his goal, there was still more to accomplish. The #1 spot in the hero rankings was what he most desired, but before that, the satisfaction of competing with and winning against Izuku. Maybe the future was brighter than he expected, and that was good. Hope kept people happy, and Katsuki had learned to hold on to that. Katsuki didn't know what the hell was wrong with him anymore. Please, there was no need to be so obsessive. Izuku was fine, at his home, alive, with one for all, happy. Katsuki had seen him happy the last few times, and he could still take care of himself. So what the hell was wrong with him that he couldn't sleep? The first night he kept it to himself, the second he cried a little, and the third he woke up from one of the worst nightmares he could ever have. It was basically that he never survived, and now he saw his classmates, his friends, his parents, and Izuku crying at his funeral. That last part was a direct blow to his appreciation and longing for the boy. He was grateful to be alive, so he hadn't caused him that harm and pain. On the fourth night he told himself he had to do something, because not sleeping had him in a worse mood than ever. So he showed up at the Midoriya's house without warning, having decided on it while walking through the neighborhood to relax. After knocking on the door, he regretted being such a hypocrite as to fall into that place after everything he'd put him through. "Oh, Katsuki-kun is here. What brings you home, young man?" The plump woman stepped aside to let the blonde in, signaling for him to come closer, and he finally set foot inside that apartment he hadn't visited since he was 6. The witch is unbearable, and I thought about, I don't know, checking on Izuku and how he's feeling. You're such a sweetheart, Lies. She must have known all the harm he caused Izuku in his childhood, and yet she was giving him a genuine smile that made Katsuki's stomach turn. "My boy is in his room. You can come in. Make yourself at home." "Thank you, Auntie." Said and done, Katsuki avoided looking too much at the surroundings. Even though nothing had changed, it felt wrong, like stirring up painful things from the past, painful because of him. Without further ado, he knocked on Izuku's door and, upon hearing an affirmation to enter, simply opened it, seeing those eyes in the foreground, full of surprise. "Kaken, what are you doing here?" "I was bored, and since you're always annoying, I figured it was better than staring at the ceiling." A chuckle came from Izuku, who was arranging something on the screen of his small television. "You guessed right. I just finished fixing the console, and I think I saw Super Combat in the drawer." His expression shifted into something thoughtful as he rummaged until he found the game. Super Combat? Seriously? Katsuki sat on the floor next to Izuku, looking at the screen in front of them. "You still have that garbage? It's the best game." "Of course I have it." "Best game, at least pick one where you actually win something, idiot." "Hey, I've improved a lot. I've been practicing since the last time we played." The last time they played? It was when they were about 6, back when Katsuki still occasionally visited this house, or when his mother had asked someone to look after him. Anyway, they played that game a lot, and obviously, we already know who won. Then he tried to forget the pain all those memories caused him and how stupid he was to have left him alone. The mere thought of little Izuku practicing Super Combat just to one day beat him made Katsuki's heart ache and sheet. It set off his heart rate monitor. Doctors had forced him to use something similar to a pacemaker for at least a year to monitor the improvement of his weak heart, and now it was taking its toll. Anything that upset him, no matter how small, left him like that, with the sensor beeping and Izuku's eyes on him, worried. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked, hearing the beeps from the sensor, his expression concerned. Katsuki roughly placed a hand over his face to stop him from looking. "Don't f with me, yeah," he muttered, grabbing a controller just as Izuku put the game in the console. "Let's see how much you brag about having improved." An F- he actually had. In the past, even if Izuku played with all might, it was Katsuki who won no matter what, but apparently now it wasn't like that, because Izuku wiped the floor with his best genus character, even after Katsuki threw out his best combo. It was a blow to his pride. The second game, Katsuki picked Endeavor and Izuku switched to Mirko. "The effing you rabbit? She's a good heroine, she can win. Not against a long-range attack, moron." "You'll see," Izuku said as he prepared for battle, and, okay, Katsuki stopped himself from smashing the controller when his character ran out of life after a single hit. That was it, he decided he'd never play this crap again. "You cheated." "How could I, Kaken? You accuse me of the worst. You can't win a fight against someone with long-range attacks if your quirk is melee." Izuku laughed as he fixed the console's settings and opened the main game screen. "Yes, you can, as long as you recognize what your quirk is capable of and know strategies. You're a FING nerd, with your shitty analysis and your shitty game." Izuku couldn't stop laughing at all of this. Did it really seem so ironic? He'd just beaten Katsuki at something, and all he could do was laugh like it was the greatest victory of his life. Katsuki thought otherwise out of sheer fury at having lost several times. Crossing his arms, he leaned his back on Izuku's bed and closed his eyes angrily. My fine motor skills aren't quite right." Another excuse for losing, because he couldn't accept defeat. "Yeah, sure, the one who lost only one arm is speaking." Izuku sat in front of him, a little closer than before. At that moment Katsuki took a second to really look at the boy in front of him. The huge scar on his cheek ran up into his scalp, leaving half of Izuku's head shaved. His heart skipped a beat, the beeping started again, and he couldn't contain the urge to reach out when his palms stung. As if it were something normal between them, he stretched out his hand and arranged Izuku's hair to cover the shaved part. "You look like an idiot," he said in a sweeter tone than he wanted. When he noticed how Izuku was looking at him, he tried to pull his hand away, but it was caught by a scarred one. "You already know I wish it would grow faster." And the blonde's heart almost stopped at such a display of affection. Though Izuku flinched at first, closing his eyes as if in fear when he saw Katsuki's hand approaching, it didn't take a second before he let it rest and even leaned into the touch. Caresses that Katsuki couldn't deny him, lightly scratching the boy's head. "Are you staying over?" "I don't think so," and 2 knocks on the door, then it opened. "I'll make dinner, Katsuki-kun." "You're staying, right? I can make curry." "If you insist," said the blonde with a small smile. Both Midoriyas seemed to want to keep him there, and who was he to refuse something like that? While they waited for the food, they kept playing Super Combat, as if Katsuki didn't want to give up in the face of constant defeat. That was him, he had to give it his all to finally beat Izuku at something again. The freckled boy was already heroic, the best hero, and the sweetest, cutest person he knew. Katsuki had to beat him at something, anything. Hours and hours of nonsense, until dinner was full of laughter and Inko's anecdotes, like the time their mothers took them camping together and they ended up fighting over who slept in All Might's sleeping bag. After that, despite Katsuki saying he preferred to go home, he was forced to sleep there, for his safety, since it was nighttime and with all the chaos after the war, it was still dangerous to go out after dark. Without excuses, he simply helped Izuku set up his futon on the floor, changed into some of his clothes, and they lay down without much thought. But under those blankets, turning from side to side without finding a comfortable position, the only thing left was to face Izuku and see him in the same situation. "Isn't it comfortable?" "It's not that," Katsuki said dryly, then remembered his therapist's words he should be more open. "I can't sleep since everything ended." A small silence, then Izuku made space on his bed and turned toward him. "Me neither." He patted the bed next to him, and Katsuki assumed he was being invited to sleep there. It wasn't like they had never shared a bed before, or that the idea bothered him, it just made him feel a little restrained. But faced with those pleading eyes, he couldn't say no. He slipped under Izuku's sheets and blankets, staying on his side to avoid their bodies touching too much. Again, it felt like a bad joke. Since when were they this close? It's hard to believe it's all over. Sometimes I wake up with nightmares. The other night I dreamed I activated One for All. I broke the limited edition All Might crystal figurine, he said, pointing to the glued, obviously broken figurine on the nightstand. The blonde gave him a nod of understanding. It must be hard for you. But it really is over. I know. Though I don't feel comfortable sleeping in my bed, in my house, it's weird. You're weird. Izuku rolled his eyes and laughed a little, grateful not to be there alone. Shut up. Are you shutting me up? Katsuki raised an eyebrow and placed his hand on the boy's jaw, squeezing his cheeks lightly. Look, idiot, you deserve to be at peace, so believe it. You saved the world. Now. Then Izuku's gaze softened, his body moved closer, and he extended a hand over Katsuki's chest. I'll sleep well if I know you're okay, he said, focusing on the heartbeat. That night was the first time they both got a good night's sleep since the war ended. Discovering that their souls were more peaceful having each other close, especially when it came to sleeping. Though sleeping together wasn't repeated, they often talked by text or calls, and in some way their subconscious felt better for it. It was strange. Everything was weird. Katsuki didn't quite understand Izuku's attitude toward all of this. Inviting him to share a bed was a little odd once they weren't in the hospital. It was probably the little childish part of the nerd coming out, born of the nostalgia they felt when they were together and alone. All those memories, and everything that was lost because of Katsuki, who tormented himself every day with that guilt in his head. But finally, there was the possibility of changing, of starting from scratch, of rising every day. The blonde promised to be his best version for Izuku. It was FING sheet. Well, Katsuki thinks that about at least 90% of things, but this time it makes sense. It was crap that when he returned to UA the FING teachers used the excuse, a hero must know how to fix what they broke, for teenagers to help fix the classroom building, and even some groups were sent on missions with pro-heroes in the city. Oh sure, there were idiots who believed the facade of learning saying it was true a hero cared about fixing the damage to the city so the civilians could return to the safety of normal. Screw them all, Katsuki has no desire to use his recovering arms to clear debris. But shit, they were doing what wasn't supposed to be their job. Wasn't it enough to save the FING world? At the end of the day, everyone arrived exhausted to the dormitories of the now Class 2A, disgustingly sweaty, some with scratches from building collapses or mistakes with debris, but certainly nothing to worry about for the first month of school. For example, the idiot Izuku thought he could handle One for All well and use Black Whip when in reality the idiot's secondary quirks were blocked. That's how he ended up in the infirmary. Why is Katsuki with him? There's no real answer to that. I was just there when a piece of roof debris almost fell on the idiot. I pushed him and they both ended up with scratches in several places. And the idiot freckled guy didn't want to go to the infirmary because he's been there since he entered you, so Katsuki basically dragged him there. Although Katsuki didn't want to waste time there either, he was still forced to let the old healer take care of him. So with a disgusting kiss on their wounds, they both automatically felt more tired than they already were, but the wounds stopped burning as they quickly closed. It was the price of an improvement fast acting. They would have been bandaged but had enough energy to use the old woman's quirk. So the two were walking back to the bedrooms as the sun went down in the sky, announcing that it would soon be time for dinner. Thanks for saving me again. Oh, of course, Izuku had to break the quiet silence of the healing to thank for the smallest thing. Katsuki clicked his tongue about that comment. Yeah, whatever. No, seriously, you always manage to save me in time. The blonde looked at him for a few seconds. It was true, but he didn't do it to win praise. His body moved by itself every time. It's the least a hero can do. Izuku lets out a chuckle. He always does that, and every time Katsuki thinks it's sweet. Maybe it is, but it deserves gratitude. If you say so, nerd. I say it. Already happier that they had accepted his comment of gratitude, Izuku remembered a couple of things. I never apologized for being late. In Or's coffin with Shigaraki, if I had arrived earlier your heart would be healthy. There he goes again, blaming himself for things that were not good for him at all. That time it was a FING accident. Things didn't go as they wanted and had planned, and Izuku did his best to get there as fast as his abilities allowed him, plus he was miles away. The only one who would have gotten there even faster was Ida, and he can't cross seas running. So it was quite an achievement what Izuku did. Shut your mouth, it's not worth worrying about things from the past, you said it. I was referring to our childhood that time, Kaken. For some reason the way they walked lightened up a bit, as if they wanted to extend the conversation. This is different, your life was at stake. Yours was in our childhood. No, you wouldn't have been able to end my life, the boy assures, as if he knew something about what was going on in Katsuki's mind in those times. Katsuki grunts a little, but I insisted on it. That topic again. Just accept my apologies and let's move on. Fine, I forgive you, nerd, he says after rolling his eyes. Let it not happen again. Since you bring it up, now the brightness in those eyes was not the same as always. They had something else to say, and that terrified Katsuki, because he knows that now comes the time to ask him for a favor. He hates giving favors, but he would listen to what Izuku asks of him. After a sigh of resignation he says, let it know, Izuku. Today I tried to use my other quirks, it's like they've disappeared. Or blocked. I thought that when I got back into the action they would appear again, but nothing. Here it was again, the meaningless murmuring until reaching the point that means, then I thought about how I had untied them the first time, but I couldn't quite understand it. You have no idea how to activate your own quirks? At all. He says, trying to laugh a little. I was fighting Monoma and the black whip just exploded out of nowhere itself. Katsuki seemed to think about it, remembering that day, the blonde who felt when she saw that the stupid nerd not only had one quirk but several. The fear of being surpassed or something worse happening to Izuku. At that time he was divided between his egocentrism and his platonic affection. But now he didn't care. He preferred the relentless Izuku with 1,000 quirks. He was more entertaining to hit and more satisfying to defeat. I came to a conclusion, it could be strong emotions. You had gotten angry several times before that. Katsuki explained, not knowing the whole truth. Izuku smiles a little nervously. A few meters away you can see the 2A building. Yes, but days before unlocking the quirks I had strange dreams about the wielders. Maybe I should connect with them and ask to use the others again. Demon greedy nerd, you have a quirk. Izuku blushes a little. Having one was better than having absolutely nothing, and he knows it. Yes, but I miss how easy everything was with Black Whip. I think he's going to be the one I'll always miss the most. For some reason that short-circuited Katsuki's brain. As if it was information his brain needed to store, and so it did. Izuku likes Black Whip more than his other quirks because of how useful it is. You can try to get it back. That's what I was getting at. I need your help. Katsuki looked at him with a raised eyebrow. My help for what the hell? Make me angry. That's the stupidest thing you've ever said to me in your stupid life as a stupid nerd. Izuku can't help but laugh. You would only help me train. Losing against you always makes me angry. Besides, it's good for us to get in shape beyond classes. Good point, Katsuki thought. Fine, but you better get it fast. I don't promise anything. Izuku said with a huge smile, grateful that his friend is accompanying him in this new phase of his life. Things never go the way you want them to, and that's something Katsuki has learned over the years, but he also knows that doing nothing about it is worse. So he is happy to help Izuku do something about it, everything they can, and is in their hands to recover Izuku's level in his prime. So they started a small training plan. The UA was not very happy about having uncontrolled teenagers, so they assigned All Might as supervisor of those trainings. Perhaps there was a bit of favoritism between students, but it had foundations and grounds when those two saved the world from the worst villains. It's not that others haven't done anything, it's that the magnitude doesn't compare. Everyone was a crucial part of the plan. But without Izuku Shigaraki, he would have won. Without Katsuki, All Might would have died against All for One. So there they were on Saturday nights training for almost 3 hours straight, between Katsuki's provocations and yelling to provoke the boy's anger. Dirty tricks and new moves that they practiced to polish, he would take advantage of every extra training to improve his performance in classes and in hero internships. The months passed and the cold approached dangerously, with autumn winds but still sunny summer days. Even though it was getting dark earlier, it wasn't a hindrance at all. The problem was that everything they did didn't seem to work, on the contrary. And that was bullshit. At the beginning of the year, Izuku could use 50% without any problem. Normally he doesn't need more than that in training, so it was fine. But when he fought Katsuki, he realized that it was unable to increase that level. Realizing this, he requested a training program that required much more of him. Perhaps under pressure it was more feasible to achieve it. Terrible idea, it was useless. Even if he fought against Kirishima, Katsuki and Shoto, the three of them teaming up against him, it was impossible. He couldn't use more than 35% and that frustrated him. His performance was getting lower and lower. So cornered in despair, he had to talk to All Might, who gave him an answer that neither he nor Katsuki wanted to hear. You transferred one for all to Shigaraki, right? I understand his body couldn't take it and gave up. Exactly, for some reason even with that I still have the quirk. It has a complex structure, no one has really understood it. Most likely it decided to stay in you because the transfer was not complete. It was as if All Might explained things more to himself than to the two boys sitting in front of him. So it must be weakened, as if a percentage has definitely gone. Was this Izuku's moment of decline as a hero? Because his face reflected the sadness that came with knowing his own quirk was slowly failing him. And although All Might began to calm him down by telling him that it was best to stop the reinforcement training so that he does not overstimulate one for all and keep it at 35% as long as possible, Katsuki saw behind the fake smile his friend was putting on and understood the surrender he was trying to convey. It was like his dreams were on hold, but the nerdy idiot thought he was okay because he managed to save the world once. A mess. Where the dream of both of fighting for the rest of their lives remained, Katsuki promised to help him and he was doing it. It wasn't fair. Before they knew it, the trees were bare and they began to wear scarves to move around campus. The depression that cold weather brings was real, because even though everyone in the class was trying to move on with their lives, it was obvious they were worried about their friend's condition. Izuku always radiates brightness and kindness lately. She does her best to hide it and seems to be fine. But not as usual. And the sighs that Izuku released into the air were noticeable in a slight hint of steam, enough so that Katsuki, who was at his side, could see it every time they walked to the dorms after classes. Although he had no idea what to do about it, he knows that their rivalry is a driving force that drives them both. I guess I have a clear path to the top. That comment brought Izuku out of his self-destructive thoughts and made him look straight into the crimson eyes beside him. What are you talking about? Your quirk. Now that it's weakened, it'll be much easier for me to kick your butt. The expected result was an exceptional glow of competitiveness in Izuku. It was what always happened, plus a small wrinkle under his eyes, but that didn't happen. Instead there was a laugh, nervous, exhausted. I'd like to tell you that I'm not going to make it easy for you. Then do it. Give it your all or give up your dream, idiot. Izuku looked at him surprised. That may have been crueler than usual, but it was a way of saying it. The way Katsuki and the other boy understood perfectly what it meant and what he had to do with it. I will do my best. Then get your butt in action and get that roadkill face off. Roadkill? The fact that those simple words had choked Izuku into surprise was simply praiseworthy for Katsuki, who couldn't contain a small laugh. Or well, a loud laugh. Izuku didn't usually see him smile like that, so he just stared at him for a few seconds with his lips spread in a smile. After reaching the dorm door, Izuku turned around before entering. Thanks for that, Kaken. I didn't do anything. No, you always manage to lift my spirits. Katsuki felt heat in his ears, receiving praise other than his natural fighting talent is. Impressive and better if it comes from Izuku. I said it was nothing. Whatever lets you sleep peacefully, Izuku says with a smile, and before entering he stopped again. How reckless he is. And you should laugh more often, it looks good on you. What the heck did that mean? But question. Why did he say that? That idiot Izuku has no idea of the weight and significance his words have on Katsuki. He managed to shatter his FING world just by saying something like, on top of all this he has absolutely nothing of meaning. Katsuki wasn't one to smile or laugh often because he found something genuinely funny or was really happy. So that has to be it. Smiling for Katsuki was an act of daring and bragging when he wins at something, but this time it was genuine. It was just because of that. Izuku told him to be happier, not that it was cute when he smiled. That night Katsuki skipped lunch for the first time this school year. He didn't feel like seeing anyone's face and not having anyone notice how red he was from receiving a FING compliment. Since when does he tend to be ridiculous? Izuku, his shitty quirk and his trashy compliments. Or do it more often? It was the day of the first frost of the students' third year. They were literally just a few months away from finishing their journey as hero students, and spirits were sky high. The simple idea of no longer having to wake up at 6 a.m. for an advanced math class and instead going on patrol and kicking villain but was comforting in a way. After all, they were about to do what they loved and were passionate about. Even after their contributions in the war, being heroes was a lifelong commitment. They would either die in battle or survive long enough to die of old age. It wasn't a concern at all when exam week was just around the corner and some were too lazy to open a book. The real concern was sitting those idiots down and explaining the same thing 500 times, the same things the teachers had said while these idiots were busy chasing flies. It might not seem like it, but Katsuki was a good classmate. If you asked him nicely, and maybe with a bribe, he'd help those who couldn't grasp certain topics, like he did every FING year. Sure, there were other outstanding students. Momo and Shoto had excellent grades, and perhaps Izuku was good in several areas too, but what the hell were half the class doing sitting at Katsuki's desk? The excuse was that he shouted at you so much about how stupid you were that you wanted to understand things. Stupid logic. Everyone there was stupid. But they had definitely managed to improve their grades on the first history exam, and that was what brought them back to the blonde's study hall again and again, bothering him with nonsense. He wouldn't admit it, but explaining things out loud to those idiots also helped him learn better. It was in one of those sessions, when Shitty Hair and Raccoon Eyes had given up and cleared the table to go cook brownies, that someone else took the seat in front of them with an open notebook. F off, Izuku. Yeah. Perfectly well how to solve that you can ask Icy Hot. Izuku smiled a little and shrugged. Todoroki-kun and Yamamo are busy, he said, pointing toward the living room, where the two were surrounded by 7 other companions. And all that's left for me is to understand this problem. After rolling his eyes, Katsuki took Izuku's notebook and squinted at the incomprehensible handwriting. Izuku. Improve your handwriting. It's so damn hard to read. It's my notes. I write better in exams. Izuku defended himself. Whatever. Katsuki didn't give it more thought and tried to decipher the messy page until he understood what the poorly placed numbers and the asymmetric hexagon were about. It was difficult not because the problem was complex, but because Izuku had made a mess of the sheet. You'll never get it if you write like this, he said, taking his own sheet and starting the exercise from the beginning. Pay attention. I'm not going to repeat anything. Under his watchful eye, Katsuki gave a lesson not only in advanced geometry but also in neatness, which Izuku sorely lacked. Once everything was organized and each formula aligned with the numbers, avoiding mistakes with commas in millions and thousands, the problem wasn't that complicated. Katsuki solved it in record time, and when he looked up, Izuku had his mouth open in disbelief. That made Katsuki smile. How? I explained it to you, idiot. Izuku took the sheet and calculated things mentally until something clicked. I missed the hundredths and the signs. Because you write everything anywhere. Izuku let out a loud laugh before getting up to let Katsuki go with that. I'll improve my handwriting, I swear. Thanks, Kaken. Disappear, nerd. And Izuku did as he asked. The moment he left, Katsuki could breathe easily. He was grateful they had removed the device that monitored his heart. He couldn't stand those annoying beeps every time Izuku got too close. Spending so much time with that idiot had softened him in ways he hated admitting. He hated the idea of being tamed, as Kirishima and Siro used to say. He wasn't a wild lion to be tamed. Yet somehow he had changed. Before the war, he had improved his attitude toward people and could work well in a team. Now, those changes were noticeable from afar. He opened up to new people, went out with friends, and expressed his thoughts and emotions in ways other than shouting. That was huge for Katsuki, a change that helped him grow as a future hero. But the thing that had changed the most, if you asked anyone, was his relationship with Izuku. Since returning to school, they were often seen together, though their encounters were still complex, sometimes puzzling to outsiders. Yet in their own way, they understood each other. The class recognized that too. And seeing them smile together was different from before. Katsuki didn't usually smile openly in public. He didn't laugh at jokes or cook people's favorite dishes when they were down. He didn't bring candy from outside stores. They had discovered a new console game, a kind of hero's cart with better graphics and addictive gameplay. They could be seen playing in the living room on rainy or snowy afternoons with nothing else to do. That was a big change. One favorite anecdote involved teaming up against Class 3B, winning a challenge in record time, and hugging each other. They hugged. Everyone was perplexed but swallowed their surprise better than getting blown up by Katsuki. During exam time, they shared studies, notebooks, and ideas, congratulating each other on improving their grades. While snow fell outside, their hearts stayed warm. 90% of the class passed, a great success. A few low grades didn't matter, they could always improve. At year's end, they would receive their official hero certificates and licenses. Physical training was tough, classes were intense, and most also worked hero internships. Coordinating everything was almost impossible. Balancing it all was the hardest part. Katsuki had no worries. One for All in Izuku remained stable, even after he began helping at Naitai's agency, following Izuku's suggestion. One less worry. Katsuki preferred honoring those who had saved him rather than returning with Best Jeanist. He tried new things, working with Edgeshot, who was beginning to recover from the sacrifice Katsuki's life had caused him. He learned to appreciate the help of others not because they thought he was weak, but because they genuinely cared. Paperwork? He did it. Boring patrols or robbery missions? He was there. The real excitement came when multiple agencies united to chase a mafia selling drugs that enhanced quirks. Villains were injecting themselves before causing chaos. Reinforcements were necessary. Several companies joined, bringing Izuku, Katsuki, Kaminari, Kirishima, Mina, and Shinso into action. They were happy to work together. It had been a long time since so many had seen each other face to face. The plan was simple. Young heroes would patrol hotspots, stop villains before they used drags, and confiscate both villains and drags. As fate would have it, Katsuki and Izuku were assigned to the same area. They worked well together and needed precision. Walking the streets at night, eyes sharp, ears tuned for civilian screams, they stayed alert. "Cac Dynamite," Izuku called, pointing to an alley. A group of boys stood in a circle, one holding something. Bandanas marked their heads. "They're from the gang." Katsuki didn't hesitate to agree, though they couldn't be sure. Precision mattered. Failure could be deadly. They pretended to stop at a market across the street. Izuku bought chips while Katsuki watched through the glass. The signal, each took something from a small box. It looked like a fast-acting injection. Reflexes activated. Katsuki jumped. Izuku left the money and followed, warning the others to keep the change. They stopped the first man about to inject himself, taking 2 out with an explosion from Katsuki. 6 against 2 wasn't fair, but with 3 out of the fight, they handled it. Izuku called reinforcements and kept 3 unconscious men under control while Katsuki faced the one trying to inject himself. One managed to distance himself and, laughing maniacally, shouted about incompetent heroes before injecting himself. His arms and head began deforming, turning into chainsaws. Crazy. Izuku dodged, but Katsuki got hit by a massive explosion on his left side, smashing him against the wall. He lost consciousness briefly, then got up too late. The man had already injected himself. Katsuki had to win. It should be easy, but size disadvantage forced him to raise the level of his explosions and movements. Sweat dried, breathing was hard. He cursed his exploding heart. The villain grabbed his leg, laughing. "Typical heroes like you will never achieve anything," he shouted, pressing Katsuki close. There was only one way out. Katsuki's grenade bomb. Close range was dangerous, but it was his only choice. He disengaged the safety and, grunting, let it fly. The explosion hit the villain, leaving him in shambles. Both fell to the ground. That was the last thing Katsuki remembered. He wished he'd seen Izuku as he hit the cold alley floor. Her mission conjugate matrix. The disgusting smell of chlorine and antiseptic always unsettled him in hospitals. Fleeting memories returned like images, reminding him how he got there. He would be even more terrified if he woke up without them. He tried to move on the stretcher, but pain tore through his back. He could barely He didn't want anyone near until he felt a touch on his head. Why was he seeing someone? He hadn't heard anyone worry about his resurrection. Odd. Izuku used to scream when he woke in the hospital. Now he saw him, lips moving silently. Panic gripped Katsuki. He stretched out, gripping Izuku's shoulders. "Talk to me." Izuku looked surprised but mouthed something Katsuki couldn't hear. I don't hear you." Now Izuku's gaze matched his as he realized what was happening. He gently pushed Katsuki back onto the bed and gestured, returning with a medical team to perform physical exams. His parents arrived moments later, faces full of concern. Everyone's lips moved, but Katsuki couldn't understand a word. Half an hour of hearing tests later, doctors reached a conclusion one Katsuki could not comprehend. A man in a bathrobe explained to his parents. Izuku's hand rested on his shoulder, not pity, but fear. Was this how it would end? Deaf forever? Worse, completely cut off from sound? And he'd never heard an "I love you" from Izuku's lips. These things always happen when it snows. It was as if the immaculate and pure snow brought terror and despair in contrast to its beautiful appearance. Things never go their way. They knew that, but this could be too much. We don't have very high expectations. The test should reveal whether he will recover his hearing soon or lose it forever. Sometimes these things are temporary due to trauma to the system. Mitsuki, dismayed, covered her mouth with both hands, trying to hold back her tears. At his side, Masaru spoke. "We'll hope the results are good. Thank you very much." And so the doctor ended up taking the blonde boy for several tests, without him understanding a thing. There was no way to communicate with him, so he just let himself be dragged along. It was the second time he had been sent for tests in less than 24 hours, and it was taking its toll. Being put into a FANG tube for an MRI was miserable. He didn't like to stay still, but he recognized the machine and knew, even without hearing, that he had to stay still. Half an hour later, he returned to his room, brow furrowed, eyes empty, devoid of any emotion. This uncertainty was unbearable. He had always thought a world where people never spoke to him could be ideal until he actually tried it. The thought of never hearing his mother yell at him again, his father laugh, or Izuku not calling him Kaken again scared him. Without good hearing, he couldn't be a hero. What would he do? His parents were speaking with the doctor again, while a nurse helped him sit and handed him a tray of food, which he refused. Izuku frowned and pointed at the food with his chin. It was clear he intended to make him eat. "I'm not hungry," Katsuki said, trying not to scream, as he still couldn't hear his own voice. Izuku seemed to get angrier before sighing. Searching for another way to communicate, Izuku took out his phone and opened the Notes app, typing quickly. "You probably want to know what happened and how you're doing. Okay, I'll tell you only if you eat. You've been unconscious for 2 days. Open your mouth and eat, Kaken." Katsuki read everything with his typical scowl, then clicked his tongue at Izuku. He was forced to grab the chopsticks and eat the horrible hospital food, a strange omelet with vegetables, chicken soup, and red jelly, hardly comforting. After finishing, he saw Mitsuki approach to speak with Izuku. It was obvious the boy had reassured her. Since his parents knew Katsuki, they simply kissed his forehead and ruffled his hair before leaving, acknowledging his independence. Izuku looked back at him when he finished eating. "Speak now, nerd." Talking was pointless. Mitsuki wouldn't listen. Izuku returned to his phone and typed. "Your hearing loss is temporary, don't worry. The explosion you caused saturated your ears, like at a concert. You might have less range on the left side, but there won't be much damage." It didn't fully reassure him, but it was better than nothing. Losing 25% of his hearing, instead of all of it, should have been comforting, but the anxiety in his chest remained. Izuku noticed and didn't know how to ease him. He continued typing. "Even so, I know you can be a great hero, Kaken. At least now we're even." Katsuki raised an eyebrow. "We're even?" he asked weakly, careful not to scream. Izuku smiled before typing. My quirk is weak, just like your hearing. Katsuki punched his shoulder but couldn't help smiling a little. Even in times like these, they were competitive, it was just who they were. Izuku continued. I know you hate words of support. But I'm sure everything will be okay, Kaken. We'll get through this together, and in a few months we'll be heroes. That was enough to make Katsuki laugh, leaning against the wall and reaching out to ruffle Izuku's hair. You're a pain in the butt. I know, Izuku mouthed then typed. I should have come sooner to help. I'm sorry, it was partly my fault for leaving you alone. Katsuki's hand returned to Izuku's hair, pulling gently. I told you not to blame yourself. It's not your fault, Izuku. Izuku pouted slightly, then surrendered to the hair pull, hands resting on Katsuki's arms to stop him from tugging too hard. Anyway, I hope you recover soon because writing makes me lazy, Izuku typed, laughing a little. You little brat, Katsuki said, laughing along. Being with Izuku made it impossible to stay in a bad mood. He had no idea when he had stopped hating him and started caring so much, but it was the best thing that could have happened. As they had recovered from the war together years ago, Izuku now kept in touch when Katsuki wasn't in the hospital. They weren't great on the phone, but Katsuki was happy to get news about missions while hospitalized. When the doctors started mild regenerative treatment, Katsuki began hearing louder sounds again. Car horns, screams in the street, even his mother yelling. Healing was progressing, and nothing seemed likely to go wrong. Perhaps he should learn from his mistake, avoid stupidity, or use support equipment to prevent it in the future, as the doctors and Aizawa recommended. Back at UA, Katsuki approached the Academy's inventor to request hearing aids. He insisted on functionality and design, matching his hero suit. The everyday ones were discreet, skin-colored, while the hero suit ones matched his suit, black, green, and red, designed for explosion resistance. The first time he tried them, he asked Izuku to test the everyday pair. I don't know what you want me to say. Anything, a-hole. Just don't change your tone. Katsuki held the device and gestured for him to speak. I'll become the #1 hero before you, Izuku said, smirking. Katsuki made him repeat it. I'll become the #1 hero before you. This time, he trusted Izuku hadn't raised his voice. Katsuki noticed a clear difference. And? Don't shout, idiot, Katsuki said, smacking him lightly. Izuku laughed, and Katsuki could hear every sound clearly. Sounds perfect. Good? Can you hear better now? Katsuki nodded, relief filling his chest. At this rate, I'll be ruined by 25%, Izuku joked. It's funny, not funny, Katsuki replied, laughing when he saw Izuku's concern. Seriously, Kaken, stop overexerting yourself. Your right arm might shrivel, your heart could explode, and now your hearing might vanish. Are you saying I'm a mediocre hero? No. I'm saying the same thing you always tell me. So if I listen to you... My hearing is perfect, Katsuki joked, tugging Izuku's ear lightly. I'm sorry. I meant take care of yourself. Izuku said. I'll do what I want, idiot, Katsuki replied, sitting on the bed and putting the hero headphones away. I wouldn't like to lose you because you don't take care of yourself. I'm not going to die, Izuku. You almost did once. It was an emergency in a war. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself. Katsuki rolled his eyes. If you promise the same, nerd. Deal. Izuku shouted, linking pinky fingers with him. Katsuki thought about how cute Izuku was doing such a silly thing. No matter how much his heart raced, it was still ridiculous. Oh really? Katsuki said in mock complaint. I won't believe you if you don't, Izuku shrugged. Katsuki closed his eyes and linked his pinky with Izuku's. Pinky promise, Izuku said. Your stupidity surprises me more every day, Katsuki muttered. Thanks. Izuku said cheerfully, sitting next to him. It seemed he wouldn't leave Katsuki alone tonight. Let's go down and make some curry in celebration. Izuku added. Katsuki frowned. That's your way of making me cook your food. No, not at all. Izuku said with a smile. You're not good at lying either. We have that in common. They laughed, and Katsuki was dragged to the dorm kitchen, where he cooked while Izuku devoured the food like a vacuum. All's well that ends well. These things were just part of a hero's life. Once it was solved, there was no need to overthink it. All that remained was to adapt to the lifestyle and improve his fighting style. After all, nothing would stop him from being a better hero than Izuku. Seriously, sometimes life takes turns one never expects. Starting with the fact that developing feelings for the one he had kicked and punched out of his way multiple times was like paying a FING karma. Knowing that Izuku wanted him there, to be with him, to be close, while keeping so much self-hatred in his chest because of the guilt that attacked him whenever he thought he wasn't deserving of it all. But the nerdy idiot, the object of his love, did believe he deserved it, and he was never wrong when it came to the people he surrounded himself with. So he simply didn't ask any more questions when he saw the green-haired man clinging to the growing friendship that arose thanks to Katsuki recognizing his own problems and weaknesses, putting pride aside and apologizing as Izuku deserved. But more than that, he wanted to give him much more, because he deserved much more. It was so that, even today, at the moment they'd been waiting for most in these 3 years, he couldn't hold back the desire to cry. A lot of memories passed through his mind, from the oldest to the most recent, and in each one Izuku's presence reigned. He remembered the time they went together to buy those cards hoping to get the limited edition All Might. Both of them really wanted it, and they got it. It was a glorious day, back when Izuku and Katsuki were still just friends. He knew that in that moment he was happier than he'd ever been in his childhood. They laughed at having achieved it. But Katsuki now knew Izuku had been happier for him than for himself. He was sure that if only Izuku had gotten the card, he would have given it to him just so he wouldn't see him sad, and that broke his heart. Always so sweet, so kind, so gentle. No one in this world deserves him, and it's a FING truth. Many may be good for him, but none worthy of someone like Izuku. Then they turned him into Deku, a useless guy who couldn't do anything right. It happened before the river accident, the first time he noticed Izuku would drop absolutely everything to help people without thinking of himself. That scared him as a child. How could someone have such a pure soul at such a young age? He didn't understand. He rejected him, pushed him away, and Izuku always came back. That scared him more. Why would someone he beat up every day keep trying? Katsuki always believed that at some point Izuku would believe what he was saying and give up once and for all. He remembered every blow, every word, every cry. It was horrible to remember, but he did, sadly. Then he remembered how he himself surrendered to the facts. Izuku was better than him. Not only because when he entered UA someone had given him a gift, but because he was always better than Katsuki, and while that scared him, since he grew up thinking he was the best, his world collapsed when he realized there were more people out there he couldn't beat if he was self-centered. The good thing is that the only thing you can do when you hit rock bottom is find a way back up. Took him a while to understand a lot of things, but hey, he finally managed it. He also remembered the first time the two smiled together, their hands joined, a war raging around them. Nothing mattered because what he had in front of him was Izuku's wide smile. That was probably the moment Katsuki realized he loved him and wanted to protect that smile all their lives. Then he remembered waking up in the hospital, every night spent together, every nightmare tormenting one or the other, but there was always someone to cheer them up. Excessive training had completely broken one for all, currently reduced to 15%, yet Izuku still seemed happy to fight however he could. After all, he wasn't alone. He had Katsuki by his side whenever he needed a place to lean on. The first hug they gave each other remained in his mind, the first time they both drank alcohol with the whole class when the 22 of them finally turned 18. It was a little clumsy, the flashes blurry, but he remembered Izuku approaching him crying, saying how happy he was to have Katsuki in his life. Katsuki didn't hesitate to wrap his arms around him, making the nerd cry more from the blonde's affection. It was a silly memory that made him happy, though he didn't admit it out loud. And last but not least, among many other memories, he remembered the times Izuku saved his life, not literally, since the nerdy idiot was always late for those things, but metaphorically. Katsuki would be nothing without Izuku's existence. He could give credit to others too, like Kirishima, who knew how to become his friend quickly, or Best Jeanist, who understood how to tame Katsuki and shape him into a good hero. Edge shot taught him the importance of giving everything for even the slightest chance of saving others. Aizawa was a guiding teacher, as was All Might. Today, Katsuki knew that experiences, responses, and the people influencing his life were what shaped him. He had just received hero status like his entire class, someone formed by everyone around him, someone who mattered to him. His vision blurred a little as he thought of all this. A small nudge on his shoulder made him react, and when he looked at Izuku, he pretended to return to his classic angry face but automatically chuckled along with the boy and their friends around them. Behind him, Kirishima and Kaminari couldn't stop laughing. Jairu and Mina followed. Soon, the whole class was immersed in suppressed laughter or huge smiles. When Aizawa finished his mini-speech, a tradition of students saying something nice, Katsuki stepped up to the mic. He tried to look disinterested, but one corner of his mouth turned up. "I despise every single one of these extras," he began, drawing general booing and a slight smile. "That's what I've said since I've known them, but even so, each one stuck their head in each other's business. Over these 3 years, we learned this is the essence of a hero. I personally learned more than I'd like to admit from these assholes." Aizawa surreptitiously scolded him for his rudeness. Katsuki continued, "So I guess thanking you all isn't out of place. Thanks, idiots. I'm proud to say you are the best generation of heroes from this school, especially because I'm in this class." Another boo mixed with laughter. "Keep doing your sheet, it seems to be going well for everyone. Finally, live long. But don't screw mine up." He stepped off the podium, receiving slaps on the head, laughter, and shouts from friends. Most importantly, Izuku, to his right, gave him the best smile he'd seen in years. "It was sweeter than I expected, Kaken." "I can be sweet if I try," Katsuki said, trying not to smile like an idiot. Izuku laughed, tears of happiness glistening. "Be careful or you'll get diabetes." As if that were possible. They stopped fooling around when All Might gave blessings and handed out diplomas. Mortarboards were tossed, laughter erupted, and hugs began. Katsuki wanted to stay out of it, but Kirishima forced him to hug him. It was unlike any hug he'd received. The redhead wrapped him in brotherhood, punching his back. Katsuki retaliated on the neck. Friends joined in. He could barely free himself. He saw Izuku smiling and without thinking, he threw himself on him, wrapping his shoulders tightly. Izuku's timid hands clung to his back as if surprised, tears falling. It wasn't cute in another context, but seeing Izuku cry from happiness because Katsuki accepted his affection? Is it time to tell him I love him? No, that would ruin everything. They were just two friends who had been through so much. A lasting hug was enough. Afterward, his parents took pictures. Mitsuki and Inko made them stand together. Katsuki held the diploma. Izuku's hand brushed against his, and they held hands briefly, smiling before being distracted by Mitsuki's squeal. Her mission conjugate matrix. Graduation night was planned solely by classes A and B. No parents. Alcohol was involved. Chaos was expected. Pro-heroes were responsibilities enough for young people. Katsuki wasn't really a fan of socializing or drinking even at 18, but he told himself it was worth it if he could see Izuku in a suit, maybe drunk. Someone had to look after that idiot. The class dove into the alcohol. Ida even had one too many drinks. Kirishima called him a coward for not taking a shot. Katsuki doubted himself, drank straight from the bottle, cheers fueling his ego. He barely remembered how he ended up dancing on a table with Shoto, imitating Grand Orca's lessons, stayin' alive blasting, classmates cheering, some filming. Regret would come later, they were happy now. What counted was Izuku's smile as he helped him down, wrapping him in his arms, laughing as they stumbled. Katsuki sought another drink to forget how good it felt to have Izuku's arms around his waist. Ijiro was there, grinning. After a shot, Katsuki slammed the bottle on the table. I'm not doing it. Oh, come on, Bakubro. If you don't do it tonight, you'll never do it. I know you. Yes, Ijiro knew Katsuki's feelings for Izuku, encouraging him all year. Katsuki had never realized that Izuku, dense as he was, didn't pick up the hints. You calling me a coward, dumbass? Katsuki slurred, voice wavering. Ijiro shoved him lightly in the chest, pulling him into a side hug. You're bro. I'm telling you, he'd never reject you, so go for it. Katsuki took it seriously, determined to prove Bakugo Katsuki wasn't a coward, especially not to Izuku. He grabbed Cake, jerked his head at Izuku to follow him. The green-haired boy did. What's that called? Breeze making them shiver. You okay? Izuku asked. Do you want to go home? Sheet, yeah, but that's not why I called you. Oh, well, I'm listening. Katsuki exhaled, hand on chest. What are you gonna do after this? Your plans? Izuku blinked, confused. Well, Mirio said there'd always be a place at Nitai's agency, maybe. All Might invited me abroad for 2 years to expand my knowledge. And you? Katsuki looked at him. Edgeshot's old agency still runs. I want to go there not because I owe him, but because I want to. I tried it, like the area and the team. That's sweet of you. Silence. Cold air grounded them. Katsuki spoke again. After this, after we're not amateurs, I want to start my own agency. I guess that's the goal for everyone. With you. Their eyes met, full of confusion, fondness, yearning, and something Izuku couldn't name. With me. You're the one who always wanted us to be heroes together. It'd be fine. Oh, Kaken, don't do it for me. Do you want this? Shut up, idiot, Katsuki said softly, leaning on Izuku's shoulder under the excuse of being drunk. I want this. It's only fun if you're with me. He was spilling way too much, surely thanks to the DM and alcohol. But deep down, he'd never say anything he didn't mean. It just embarrassed him to admit it. When he heard a few sniffles beside him, he turned in concern only to see the freckled boy grinning wide through his tears. Nothing would make me happier, Kaken. And it seemed that everything ended there, that they were starting a new chapter together. But I don't think I can be a hero anymore. That was the moment when Katsuki's jaw would have hit the floor at those words. Izuku, I know you're drunk, but what the F dash? The boy laughed a little, rubbing the back of his neck in embarrassment. I didn't tell you, but One for All is super weak inside me. The last time I used 15%, I felt it fading more. I don't want to take the risk and get in the way when I can't take care of myself. So I was going to take All Might up on his offer, and since I'll be there for 2 years, take a course in weight. Don't mock me. Why would I mock you? Again, this shyness. Well, because I wanted to dedicate myself to quirk analysis and be a professor at UA. For Katsuki, that was worse than a no thanks, because, what do you mean Izuku wouldn't even be a hero to compete against? What does all this mean? Surely his face showed it because Izuku's free hand slid across the blonde's back as he pulled him close, keeping him in a light side hug, resting his head on Katsuki's shoulder. I'm really sorry, Kaken. I don't understand. It's the best for everyone. If one day my quirk disappears, at least I won't be in danger, right? It's the safe thing to do. Katsuki let himself be hugged a little. It could have been the alcohol or the shock of the information. But tears were running down his face too. Kaken? Izuku asked, caressing his back. You're such a childish idiot. Despite the mockery, Katsuki let out a loud sob before pulling away from Izuku's arms. I'm sorry, but we said it would be for life. We are for life. I just have to learn where my limits are. It's no use throwing myself into the lion's den without anything to defend myself with. Katsuki found logic in all this but wanted to be a little selfish and keep fighting for his dreams. Shut up. Where's the stubborn nerd who never gave up even when he didn't have a quirk? Izuku laughed a little. I was like 14, Kaken. Sometimes you have to grow up. He was right. Izuku had always been right about things. Katsuki just had to cry a little longer before letting out a pained sigh. Fine, whatever. If that's what you want. In a world where they'd lived together as long as they could remember, being apart was their worst nightmare. One of them understood his feelings, realizing he was in love the day he had nearly died for him. The other still thought it was just a growing friendship born from all that pain. And he liked it that way, recognizing each other, helping, trusting, leaning on each other more than anyone else. Forgetting the past and basking in the warmth in their hearts in the present, nothing else mattered. Because he melted hearing for the first time in years, the old nickname Katsuki used before, Deku, soft and tender on his lips, and Izuku smiled, happy to hear it one last time. Thanks, Kaken. The past can't be changed. But they could fix the future of their lives. Both thought of that daily, some more than others. Their graduation night ended with that news. But it wasn't all bad, was it? Nothing had gone the way Katsuki hoped, but it wasn't all bad, not at all. They could only hope for better news in the future. That's not true, well, maybe, but it made me happy. You should be happy. How could he say he wasn't happy, when it had been so long since he'd seen him beyond a FING screen? Katsuki was tired of that DMN distance he had refused to accept from the beginning. But in the end, it wasn't his FING decision. He hated every single person who took his only loved one away. Even All Might was included in that list. It had been a year since he had taken Izuku abroad with him for a strange UA expansion there. To put it in an easy-to-understand way, the Americans wanted to know a little more about Japanese teaching methods and society values, especially because a hero like All Might managed to lower crime rates in his prime. And that unfortunate Izuku agreed to go with him because he was afraid of facing reality. Izuku can be a hero even if his quirk has been reduced to its minimum. It's not like he was useless because of it. There are heroes out there with quirks far less useful than the power of one for all. But on the other hand, Katsuki understood the other boys' fear, especially after the war. They had almost lost their lives in it, and that brings traumas that although they had been treated with therapists during their stay at the UA, it does not mean that it stops affecting them. For Izuku, fear was not even a shadow of what he once was, even worse, being a hindrance to other heroes and causing damage to the city or its inhabitants. So there they were, with a couple of dreams crushed and reduced to the ashes of what they once were, and worse still, with distance in between, which was the worst sheet in the word. Izuku's happy face on the other side of the screen brought him out of his horrendous thoughts before focusing on what they were talking about. It is true that they managed to coordinate schedules and agendas only one day a week. I'm happy for you, got it? He said to Izuku in a somewhat sarcastic way. If that was really what he wanted, for him to accept his silly happiness, there it was. How was the teacher training course? That was new, the blonde's real interest in the activities. In the past, he wasn't one of those people who paid attention to details and such things because he really didn't care what other people did. But over time, Katsuki began to realize how unapproachable he was, and that while people like Izuku or that idiot Kirishima would stay no matter what he was like, there must have been something about him. Especially since civilians can't trust someone who is unapproachable. It's like what the country did with Endeavor. Even though it was number 2, it always lacked something, and that something was the connection with society. Katsuki didn't want to be second, the one who was left behind, only because of his temper, so he made an effort to start changing little things, and above all he tried hard with Izuku. Try to make having a FANG ocean between them be what separates them forever. And seeing how the smile on the other's face grew was simply gratifying. It moved something inside the blonde's mind. I'm doing great. I have so many ideas for class scripts. Katsuki saw how on the other side of the screen they showed him a stack of notebooks, some of which he recognized since they were the classic quirk analyses that the nerd had always done. Others were new, probably what he just mentioned. A slight laugh of irony came from Katsuki's lips. You haven't changed at all. Well, why change something that works? I guess you have a point. There was a mini silence between them where the only thing that could be felt from both sides was the static of the video call they were on. From the way the nerd hesitated a little, looking anywhere but at Katsuki, it was obvious he was about to say something he didn't know if he should or not. It's impossible to hide a gesture like that, not when he knows it so well. You did change, Kaken. That's what the idiot said before leaning back a little on the back of his chair. His hands, full of those scars that were there from the beginning, played nervously on the desk. I realize that you're doing the best you can, right? Asking me about my life when you probably have little interest in it. If he could, Katsuki would kick his butt for insinuating those things. What the hell does he know? He has no FING idea how much Katsuki cares about Izuku, how much he cares and worries. But it's okay, it's not his fault, it's the blonde's fault for never making it clear. For not making those things clear to him in some way. Maybe it's time to change that. Don't assume other people's intentions, idiot, he said to her in a voice that was a little harsher than necessary. I wouldn't ask you anything if I wasn't interested, I wouldn't even answer your FANG call. From the way the air left the boy's lungs on the screen, you could tell he felt some kind of relief. His shoulders relaxed and his signature smile returned. Izuku was so easy to read when it came to body language. Or Katsuki was a secret obsessive who knew every micro-gesture and detail in that nerd's behavior. It's a discussion that would take hours of debate. He seemed to think for a moment before speaking again. Okay, you're right. I should stop doubting you. Yes, sheet, you should. Another thing, Kaken. Oh, here they go again. It was as if Izuku always had something to do to screw him up, or to make him explain things he didn't want to explain. As if he was trying to get information out of his poor, tired brain. Did you move to a new apartment? And he certainly didn't expect that. How had he come to that conclusion if he always made these video calls in random places in the house, usually a boring white wall with no decoration at all? Wait, Izuku put a tracker on him? Yes. Why do you ask? He asked, raising one of his eyebrows before looking around. Seriously, there is no visible clue as to whether he had changed apartments or not. I had a feeling, well, your walls are darker and you have the window on the left, also the clock behind you is missing. Demon psychopath, how the hell do you remember the color of my walls? You're scary. Izuku couldn't contain his laughter. It really was just a fleeting thought. Maybe you just moved things around and painted. Stop the nonsense. Although at first glance it had been somewhat worrying that Izuku realized that he moved, there were thousands of ways to give an excuse for this act. The idea was that he wouldn't find out. He wanted to pass off the move as a little secret and the real reason even more so, but after all it seems he's going to have to make an excuse. What did you do with the other apartment? I sold it. Izuku's face now showed surprise at this. You sold the apartment your parents gave you? It was beautiful and had a perfect location. That's why I was able to sell it, nerd. Katsuki said, looking away. Lying to Izuku wasn't his favorite activity. So he took his cup of coffee, which had already cooled down because he had forgotten it, and drank a little. I needed the money. What for? Hey, you could have told me, I would have helped you with whatever I could. I don't need your pity, Izuku. It's not pity. He said it and it was the truth. Katsuki knows that if he needed to, the idiot would sell his organs to give Katsuki money. After the war, all the teenagers who were involved in helping the heroes had been rewarded with a significant sum of money. Especially Izuku and Katsuki among others, so both had reservations for a long time. I expect that the blonde had already spent more than 90% of those reserves as soon as he started his secret project. On the other hand, Izuku told him that he gave something to his mother and the rest he has well saved in a bank account so that when they return to Japan they can get a decent place to live and have merchandise in the cupboards to eat. Anyway, I fixed it myself, I'm saving up. Oh? Is that for the car you said you wanted? Exactly, I'm not going to ask you for money on my whims. Well, there was no need to lie here. Katsuki was ambitious, everyone knew that, but he wasn't ambitious on the toxic level or the level where he wanted power and money to squander like an idiot. He liked nice things, the comfort of a good apartment, a decent dinner, and without a doubt one of his dreams since he was little was a luxury car, so there you see him living in the squalor of a damp apartment to save a percentage of his land for the car he always wanted. I could give it to you as a gift. Don't even think about it. He hated receiving gifts, even more so if they were something cool. Izuku laughed a little. You wouldn't owe me anything in return. But you would force me to take you everywhere, I'm lazy. It's only fair. Katsuki shook his head, his lips curling into a small smile. I don't want your money or your gift. Keep living your life. By the way, I have to go. Already? So fast. Izuku seemed to look at his watch. They had spent luckily 40 minutes of talking, which was nothing. I thought it was your day off. It is, but I have another commitment and I don't owe you any explanation, Izuku. It seemed cruel, but somehow he said it with that smile he uses when he jokes. And another boy just pouted slightly. Fanko, good luck. All Might sends his regards. Tell the old man not to die. I'll tell him you wish him health. That sheet, he said as he stood up from his chair, bending over his laptop a little before looking for the power button. Bye, nerd. Goodbye, Kaken. Once the call was over, Katsuki himself noticed what time it was. He wasn't late for the extra weekly meeting with the pink-haired idiot, which gave him time to change out of his pajamas into something more normal to go out on the street. One of the things he hated most about his new apartment wasn't just the damp running down the walls or how small the kitchen was. What he really hated was how far away it was from absolutely everything. It wasn't a dangerous neighborhood, luckily, although if it were, no one would dare to mess with it. It was simply a neighborhood on the outskirts of Mizudafu. And the worst part was the train. I had to travel almost an hour by train to get to a station that would take me 15 minutes walking from the idiot inventor's agency. Every time a drunk sits next to him, he closes his eyes and wonders why the hell he's making all this sacrifice. Every time he has only one thing for dinner, he remembers why he does all this. There is a huge reason for his poverty. He was working on something big, and although it wasn't just his salary that was affected by it, it was too expensive. Even though the entire class was willing to help financially, even with the support of All Might and a couple of other heroes, it was difficult to get the full payments on time. That was the main reason why they were late, and even worse, the work was complex. Katsuki doesn't understand much about it. He only goes to Hatsum's agency because she asks him to and wants his opinion on a bunch of nonsense. What color to make the pieces, what such power looked like, what it felt like to use such things. What the hell did Katsuki know? This time when they arrived, not only was the pink-haired idiot there, but also someone they had allied with, Melissa. Katsuki forgot her last name, but he knows that she is the daughter of a friend of All Might. And a group of stupid researchers of quirks and science that the blonde doesn't care about. Everyone speaking and talking about their own progress, how they had studied each part of One for All not only when Izuku used it but also that they had important contributions from All Might and some of Nana Shimura's writers about what she believed to be the workings of the quirk. While he was looking at the slides on the television that had some information plus some predictions of what the suit would look like once it was ready. So we know that he didn't lose his quirk but that it has been weakened. It is still in his DNA as a recessive gene and there are many ways to improve it. But that doesn't guarantee anything. That's why the suit is responsible for covering its weak points. What if the suit breaks? It would be made of a light and almost indestructible material. I think it's unlikely to break. The voices in the room tortured him. He was there out of commitment and for having been the idiot who gave the idea to execute all this, but in general there were many things that he ignored. He doesn't know about genetics, nor does he electronicize support devices for heroes. But he knows how every detail of Izuku's quirks works, which is somehow useful for all these idiots who had only seen him in action through a screen. That meeting was mostly informative. They had been dealing with legal and planning issues for half a year. Talking was the worst. But Katsuki knows how important it is to have everything under control before taking action, so this time, by the miracle of existence, was the last time they would get together to talk. The project was approved by Japan's national security and all that remained was to put in the main investments of money to obtain the raw material and for both Melissa and Hatsum to put their hands to work to start the costume project. While quirk researchers would support with their knowledge in the technical functionality of each thing. Excited Bakugo? The blonde girl with glasses approached her. She knew her. She'd seen her at that weird event they were invited to during her freshman year. She's a good inventor. I would be more excited to see some results. And Hatsum, who was beginning to gather a couple of papers, laughed. You have to be patient, everyone. Creating such a complex baby will take years. Years, years, not months, or at least 2 years. The project was scheduled to take place in 5 years if nothing went wrong in the middle of the process, which was a FING bummer. Katsuki is supposed to pretend everything's fine, that nothing's wrong, that eating instant ramen every day is what he really likes? For 5 years? Although the worst part of all this was having to keep a secret that more than 30 people know and could accidentally open their mouths at any moment. Katsuki sighed deeply before getting up to leave once. At least the shitty part is over. Exactly. Melissa will be able to make the prototype as soon as she sets foot in her home. The mentioned girl smiled happily. I promise to send it as soon as possible for the final arrangements here. And that was enough for Katsuki. He said goodbye to both of them with just a wave of his hand, leaving through the main door that led to the city center full of shops, coffee shops that smelled delicious and some shitty mega businesses. For the moment he decided to walk back, a little exercise wasn't bad, and maybe stop by to say hello to Best Jeanist, tell him how things were going with the project since he was also excited. Everything was going smoothly. The words that he repeats in his head resonate with him in the loneliness of walking the streets. Nothing ever goes the way I want it to, the voices in his head shouted. Izuku is supposed to be here now, striving to become a hero just like him, fighting each other for the top spot in the rankings. Helping each other improve, because the fight is not only for them but to save and help the people who needed it. They should be beating up some villain in some remote part of the country right now, feeling the adrenaline rush through their veins. But not. Izuku is in America, studying to become an ideal teacher for children in the hero class, to train the next generation of brats using their quirks to save people. And Katsuki melts into the misery of clinging to a desire he's had since he was who's the pathetic one here? Someone who managed to recognize his surroundings and who is happy with how his life continues even if it is not what he expected. Or someone who clings with claws and nails to understand that his best friend looks for the good side of things and finds other possibilities to be a hero because the one he really wants is outside his hands. Perhaps for others all this could seem like Katsuki was selfish and only did all this for personal satisfaction. Anyone would say this and he would understand why they say it. From the outside this is how it feels. But for someone who knows how to read every microgesture or sign between the lines, Katsuki knows that while Izuku processed it well and understands its possibilities to move forward once One for All has been weakened, but deep down when he says, everything is okay, there is a part of him that cries for not getting that dream. Saving the world once isn't enough for someone like Izuku, who has such an ingrained sense of justice in his head. He was one of those who planned to die in battles saving all the people that could. And Katsuki knows there are still many people that Nerd has to save. Somehow his feet carried him to the central station. Luckily he could go home from there and the train ride wouldn't be so long. Said and done. In a while he was walking around his neighborhood, stopping at a convenience store to get something more than just ramen, and I didn't expect to see something like this. The store had a silly area. Like every store, on a shelf there were mini stuffed animals of all kinds. But a little green sheep caught his attention. How could he not recognize it? It was the line of animals that a shitty company brought out about war heroes, the first merch of the whole class. Could he spend a few pesos on this? He could. He felt stupid walking to his apartment with his keys jingling in his hand and now a new sheep keychain on it. But when he threw them on the hall table, he knew he had given some color to the dampness of the shitty walls. You better accept that, nerd. There are feelings that slip beyond anyone's control. You could be the most zen person in the universe, meditating on top of a mountain, and still, anything could push you over the edge. For Katsuki, that something could be literally anything. A piece of paper fluttering across the floor, a voice that carried a little too loudly down the hall, the constant tapping of a pen. It wasn't just irritation, it was a storm brewing in his chest, a jittering energy that made his fists clench before he even realized it. And although he would have changed many things about his personality because it was not healthy to live like that, it is not that it has completely disappeared. But among all the things that once bothered him, there was one that had its own name, body and voice. Midoriya Izuku was everything that could irritate him: loud, clumsy, kind, capable, righteous, invincible, heroic, sweet. He had absolutely everything to be the greatest hero in the world, and once he was, the world tends to remember from time to time that a 16-year-old boy saved their lives by putting his own in danger. And that was what Katsuki hated the most. The ability to leave everything to save someone. How is it possible to be so dedicated to a goal when people don't even give you the value you deserve? How can you do good without looking at who it is? How was Izuku able to reach out to someone who made his life impossible? 500 years could pass, and if he were still alive, in that hypothetical case, he would still be searching for the answers to those questions. So he gave up long ago on trying. He only had to accept. Accepting that Izuku was better than him for those things and many other reasons. But acceptance doesn't mean he won't do something to change it, so he set out to surpass his lifelong rival and best friend. Although that idea was shattered by the weakening of his quirk. Anthem. Katsuki didn't give up easily. That's why even if he was bothered by a leak in his bathroom that he couldn't fix, he would simply take out his headphones to listen to things around the house, and that helped him not hear the smallest noises. That's why he accepted visits from his old witch's mother, because she brought him decent food. And that's why I was doing as much overtime as I could on days like today. A hero's salary isn't just based on their popularity, but on everything they can cover by working. Legally, Katsuki looked for all the ways to increase his salary, and even then his attitude and reputation of being someone unreliable with society was what kept him even out of the top 20 of heroes. But anyway, he didn't do it for the fame, although it would be good for him since that gives him more income. It could be 5 a.m. and he had decided to work the evening shift since they paid 5% more, as it was an inconvenient schedule for any job in general. You'd think crime was higher at that time of day, in some cases yes, but only if you're talking about organized crime. The cheap villains they used to find on patrol were a joke to any one mediocre hero. One of Dynamite's explosions was enough to leave them lying on the ground and for the police to take them away. It wasn't so bad, walking at night without being bothered, in the silence and peace of the half-empty streets, a couple of teenagers laughing, people coming out of bars, couples kissing in hidden corners. He was starting to get a taste for this. If the day had 18 working hours, Katsuki did them all. Although it was a bit excessive, his body did not complain about it. And when he returned to the agency before the sun came up, he didn't even feel like going back to his horrible apartment, so he used the agency's dormitories to rest for a while and returned to work as soon as he opened his eyes. There were other, easier ways to increase his salary. When he was too tired of overtime, he did volunteer work that didn't earn him any money, but it did raise his ranking points. Higher than the top means more bonus. He did everything for love. Or something like that. What did he know about love? Absolutely nothing. He hated romantic movies, he hated being talked to about those things, he hated seeing people loving each other in public, and he hated his friends pressuring him to go out with someone. Worse, Katsuki hated that some of his friends knew that he had been in love with the same boy since he was 16, the boy he met when they were little children. But at the same time he had a new concept of love, a concept that he created himself, and that was very beautiful if you asked his friends. Katsuki would give his entire life for Izuku, and he had. Not only that, Katsuki decided he would live forever for Izuku and every single thing that this nerd needs. It was hard to understand why he was doing something as big as giving him back his dream of being a hero and keeping it a secret until he could give it to him. Kirishima, for example, he didn't understand. If it had been up to him, he would have told Izuku everything from the first second. But why give him false hope or make him spend 5 years wondering whether it might work or not? That mental burden must be especially on Katsuki. They tolerate him as long as Izuku is happy with how he handles his life until they give him his hero suit. That's what his life was about for the last year and a little longer. He had no idea that his body was starting to wear out from overexertion. His common night patrol routine was based on walking through different streets, moving away from the center and inspecting different areas that normally no one would pay attention to, or those that were followed by police reports indicated there were more crimes or gang involvement. Although it wasn't complex at all, the lack of sleep and balanced nutrition made it boring and a little more complicated. There's only so much sheet someone can take, and everyone reaches a physical limit after overexerting themselves for so long. Unfortunately, Katsuki thought he could handle it just fine, which was a cruel lie, because that night when he arrived at the agency around 5 a.m. and threw himself on one of the beds, his body decided not to wake up. One of the cleaning assistants found him and didn't worry too much. These things happened often, and she had already seen Dynamite in that situation. The concern came when Edgeshot asked this woman where the boy was. She replied that he had been sleeping for about 4 hours. Something was off ever since you saw him sleeping in his hero suit. He usually took off his accessories and woke up when the sun came up. So Edgeshot didn't take long to call an ambulance, hoping that their best employee just collapsed from exhaustion and nothing serious happened to him. No one had noticed everything that was happening to the blonde lately. No one has any idea how he lives, and they thought that someone so strong always boasts about his abilities he could stand these things. Overtime, dirty work, poor sleep schedule. In the distance, about 5 minutes after calling, the sirens of the ambulance parked in front of the agency were heard. The paramedics came in as soon as possible and did their job quickly, for concluded that he was fine, alive, but his body collapsed from exhaustion. To make matters worse, the FING press was outside the agency when they saw there were ambulances outside. A couple of other heroes decided to say that it was just an accident inside, that everything was fine, but they quickly asked who the hero was who was taken to the hospital. Within minutes, Dynamite's name was at the top of every headline. While the poor man continued with his conscience asleep, the doctor's tests were done and they showed significant malnutrition and dehydration, nothing that can't be solved with a good serum loaded with necessary nutrients and plenty of hours of sleep. But logically, any acquaintance of Katsuki would worry about how he was, and his parents would come to see him every day until he wakes up. It didn't take him more than 2 days to achieve it. His body already felt better, his memory brought back the recollection of how he ended up there, and his mother insisted on scolding him as if he were 5 years old. He deserved it. He thought about his goals before his health, and that could have ended badly. Was that how Izuku always thought? Maybe Katsuki felt like a bit of a winner for once in a long time. His friends were quick to make appearances with fruit baskets and snacks so he wouldn't die from the hospital sheet. He appreciated it all a bit, but refused to let it increase. The money they gave him for Izuku's suit, he says it's his project and he only accepts the help because it's really expensive. He doesn't want anyone else to end up complicated with bank accounts like he is. At least promise that this won't happen again, Kirishima told him after fighting with him for about 2 hours. Katsuki looked away. He can't promise something like that. You have no right to tell me how to live my life. I know, bro. But you really gave us all a huge scare. The redhead's run-over dog face made he feel a little sad. He could agree with him for a while, maybe. Look, you can make a little extra money on other things that won't tire you out so much. That interested him more. Talk shitty hair. You have a good popularity, you could put together a pseudo-career as a model. Bullshit, I'm a hero, not a pretty face to put in shitty magazines. Bro, you literally just have to wear whatever they give you and pose a little and they pay well. I made it to get Mina a gift last month and it's a good amount. Maybe the idea wasn't as bullshit as he'd thought. He had helped shape his parents' brand a few times, but truth be told, he wasn't much of a fan of doing this kind of stuff. Shit, that's just what one does for love. Still, it gave him a mission once he got out of the hospital, securing a couple of photo shoots from the brand or magazine he actually cared about. Asking the agency's secretary to handle it would probably get the job done. It wasn't exactly difficult. And he knew whatever money came from it would go to something worthwhile. That was the plan, at least. He just hoped not too many of his acquaintances would laugh at him for it, or worse, turn it into some kind of joke. But deep down, he knew some probably would. On the last night in the hospital, he was messing around with his phone, silently praying that for once they'd let him go and rest in his apartment. Lying here felt just as bad as being at home, the same sheet in a different room. Then, lucky or unlucky, a vibration on his phone yanked him out of his spiraling thoughts, and for a moment he almost forgot everything else. And he told me what happened to you. I know it must be late there, but I wanted to know how you were. Reading that message did so many things inside him that it shouldn't have. There was Katsuki being an idiot and failing in the advice he's been giving the nerd for so many years. Take care of yourself before taking care of yourself. He was a hypocrite. How could I even answer him? I didn't have the nerve to do so, but I couldn't ignore him either. Kaken. I'm fine. I'm glad to hear that. You hadn't answered my previous messages a few days ago and I was worried, but I thought you were just busy. I saw you a couple of times on the news here. Kaken. In the news up there? Yes. They say you went from 31st to 19th in 1 week, which is a lot. I wanted to tell you I was proud of you, but seeing how you finished, I can't support that behavior. Katsuki's eyes widened as he read that last part. It was like listening to his witch's speech again, but this time from a person he really should. His mother was a fool. She would always want the best for her son, and she has had those talks since always. But for him, hearing it from Izuku was like an absolute truth, or in this case, a stake in his heart. His jaw closed a little, his teeth clicking together before he typed again. Kaken. Don't be a pain, nerd. No, Kachin, seriously, I'm glad you're moving up because I know how much you want to be in the top one, but there are other ways. I just want you to be okay. I can't be there to see you. For some reason that hurt him more than anything. Izuku wanted to be here, by his side, supporting him in a complicated moment of his life, and that was a very nice gesture from his partner. Unfortunately, Katsuki couldn't back down now. He had to be strong and stick to his usual routine so as not to worry the other boy more than usual. Kaken, if I promise it won't happen again, will you leave me alone? If you say you're going to be fine, then I let it go, but one more thing. If you're working so hard because you need money, tell me right now. Of course, the idiot knows that Katsuki is saving up behind that facade that it's just for a crappy car, which was partly true. In truth, Katsuki wouldn't accept a single peso from anyone, much less from him. The idiot would be paying for his own gift, and that wasn't right in anyone's mind. Kaken. It's not about that, it's about the ranking. Well, in that case just take better care of yourself, please. I want to come back in 5 months and see you alive, Kachin. Kaken. You will do it. I'm glad you did. I'll let you sleep now. See you, Kaken. Have a good recovery. After that last message, Katsuki didn't feel strong enough to answer his messages again, so he simply turned off his cell phone and left it on the nightstand to settle into bed. Always as uncomfortable as all those in hospitals. Well, some things had to change. He hoped Kirishima's idea wasn't cheat so he could use that money to eat something more solid. He would leave the overtime at the agency to start taking care of myself. Maybe that will lower his ranking a bit. He wouldn't be making as many attributions to society as he has been doing now, but it doesn't matter, he must stay alive. One more night in the hospital, just that. Every time he left a hospital he felt like a prisoner leaving prison. To then go to a worse pressure that was his decaying department. But hey, at least there was entertainment, a laptop, and a nice view of the sunrise every morning, plus instant ramen that was tastier than hospital food. He threw the keys on the table, jingling the sheep keyring, which he discovered had a small bell inside. He left his work headphones next to him. He had forgotten to take them out to sleep before fainting, and the doctors gave them to him in a small box. He knows he has to cook something decent to eat, and that means putting in the effort. Besides, he's been given a day's off work, so what's Katsuki supposed to do for 3 days? Starting with a shower, because he doesn't remember how long he had been out of the game, but he felt totally dirty and hated feeling that way. If there was one thing he hated about his quirk, it was excessive sweating. He always enjoys his time alone, taking a leisurely shower, shopping without anyone yelling at him that they want something different or that it's cheaper even if it's crap. Sometimes he also de-stresses with some clean background music. He won't admit it, but there are certain musical genres that he likes. Is it a crime that he listens to K-pop? Blame Izuku for giving him that taste. Although he didn't like being bored at home very much, he was able to get back into a good rhythm for other things. The agency's secretary did get him a photo shoot for a sportswear brand, and if the brand's creative director liked the result, there was potential for him to become an ambassador. That aside, he started to take a bit of his savings for the car so he could buy food to create a balanced meal for lunch and dinner. At least it's better than just ramen. It's not like he have a greedy dinner, but at least it has real vegetables in there. A nice bowl of cold udon sat next to his laptop as he organized some logs from missions he'd covered a while back or some reports of trapped villains. He is exiled from field work, not from the rest of the things he had put off for a couple of months. It was then that a message came from his cell phone that was a little further away. He didn't expect anything from anyone because he hadn't spoken to anyone these days. He was becoming an antisocial old man prone to shutting himself away for the rest of his life and living with 20 cats. He was feeling down, okay? He was going to completely ignore the notification if it weren't for the name on the screen. Hey there, do you have a moment? I'd like to call you. That nerd would never have asked for a call beyond the weekly one they usually have when their schedules coincide. And they didn't always coincide, but they had planned to talk on Friday night for Katsuki, but if she went to him at this time on a Wednesday, it must be something urgent. What time was it in the United States? Like 1 a.m.? He didn't even answer the message. There was no need to call him, and since they always made calls they preferred video calls on Izuku's whim. He said he liked to see Katsuki's face in something that only the news So open the app on the computer and press Izuku's contact, waiting about 15 seconds before the call was answered. Kaken, I didn't think you'd call. Do you feel better? Izuku said. He was clearly leaning against the wall of his bed. It was noticeable because of the pillows around him, and the light was low, only the screen was illuminated. Katsuki on his side was eating a bite of udon when the call was answered, and the boy began to speak in that slight greeting. Better than ever, Katsuki says, wiping himself with a napkin, not wanting to be rude with his manners. What happened to you, nerd? You look like you've been crying all day. The goal of that phrase had been to make Izuku let out at least a chuckle, and he succeeded, so a spark of pride vibrated inside the blonde. I didn't do it, he starts to say, but I almost. I'm sorry, it's just that I started thinking about what happened to you the other day and dash. No, I already told you that I'm fine, we already talked about it, don't give it another thought, idiot. It's not that, Kaken, you collapsed from exhaustion. I know you're okay and everything, but I know if I had been there I could have helped you and you wouldn't have ended up like this, and being here it's not the same. I thought I would adapt to the language. I made a couple of friends and that's great, but you're all there and you get together for dinners or fun outings or you work together, but I miss Mom too. Katsuki would have stopped all those murmurs in midair when the idiot seemed worried about him and would have said something to him so that he wouldn't worry about him, since he promised to behave and take care of himself. But when he saw him start to whimper, he knew he had to stay quiet and listen to him. Somehow he knew it was going to happen sooner or later. Izuku was a person totally rooted in his affections, and it is known why he is still friends with Katsuki even after everything that happened. It had actually taken longer than Katsuki expected. He lasted a year and a half without crying in his ear, and that was a personal achievement. Or maybe he had cried but never told him, which would be worse because he would have repressed his feelings for a long time instead of telling his best friend. Aside from that, Katsuki liked to be there to hit him and make him cry for something else, not because his feelings are invalid, but because you'd rather see him cry for a hit than because he feels alone. The worst thing is that I'm going to have to stay one more year. All Might is doing very well here and I really need to extend my course to obtain the guarantee of a valid title in Japan, and I signed up to give a couple of talks at primary schools. It's like an internship that gives extra credit, but it was last year. It's horrible. I want to go back, I want to see them, I want to hug my mom again, or for you to hit me because I'm an idiot. You're an idiot. I know, but I'd like to hear it in person. Izuku's tears began to run down his cheeks a little, slowly, since it was not a desperate cry but a release of his feelings. What are he supposed to tell him? I'm not good at this stuff, Izuku. Why don't you call round face? I don't want to bother her. Katsuki let out a wry chuckle. And you do want bother me? You're not doing anything, he said, laughing a little. I was working, nerd, from home. He shrugs as he stirs his udon. That's not the point in the end, look. It's not that I don't want to listen to you, it's that I don't know what to say to you. That I'm a weak crybaby? You can tell yourself in the mirror. Well, right now Katsuki has to bring up his 2 years of therapy while he was at UA. You must search through your memories for the conversation where you asked for advice on giving advice. Listen, no one here is going to forget you because you've been gone for a while, and definitely when you come back many of those extras are going to be happy to see you. Missing them is normal. You can try to stop thinking that talking to them is bothering them. You have no idea if you bother them or not if you don't write to them. And boy was he surprised and proud of himself when he finished speaking what was really a verbal vomit of the first thing that came to his head that could serve Izuku because of how the idiot is. And Izuku looked at him with a beautiful smile on his lips, curved in a smile full of feelings. Definitely many of those would be happy to hear from you more often. That's nice, thanks Kaken. I guess I just missed you all a little. The FING voice in the back of her mind was screaming at her that it was now, that she should tell him that she loved him, that it was the perfect moment. No, it wasn't. Izuku was in a vulnerable moment. It would be like taking advantage of that. Katsuki finally settled in his chair a little, running a hand over the lower half of his face. He can be a little vulnerable with him. Come on, he cried in front of Izuku a little. What's more, he must have been the only person who saw him truly cry. Neither his mother nor All Might have seen his true tears and feelings. But he could tell him something else. I miss you too. On the other side of the screen, while she wiped her tears with her hoodie, the boy stared at her as if he hadn't expected it. Excuse me? I didn't hear you because you covered your mouth with your hand. You nerd, I'm not going to repeat it. They both knew what game they had gotten into, the words were clear, the tone of voice too, and that idiot doesn't have hearing problems like the blonde one. It's logical that he just wants to inflate his ego because Katsuki rarely says things like that. But he finally laughed a little before speaking again. I'm glad to know you miss me. Who lied to you like that? And Katsuki also smiled a little but wanted to finish for a few seconds. Listen, Izuku, you are continuing with your life training as a professional to teach them brat how to be a real hero. Focus on that. When you return, everyone will be waiting for you with open arms. Do you think so? I'd like to see them and get the whole class together. Again. Yeah, those idiots haven't met since graduation. Really? I thought so. Well, diverting the subject was easier than continuing to talk about feelings. I saw some photos where several were together. Do you know what's called a group of friends? I'm not going to hang out with that idiot Icy Hot just for fun. You're lying, Izuku says. He uploaded a picture of you the other day. Katsuki raises an eyebrow when he heard that but raised his cell phone to see it, looking at Shoto's social media until he found the photo. That BS duty, we went to eat after a mission, we didn't plan it. Now you boast in front of me that you can go out with our friends. It's not, you brought it up, he complains now a little frustrated at being cornered. Since when is Izuku so unhinged? Can't find the word to describe it. You know what? Thank you, Izuku sniffed before smiling genuinely. The first thank you seemed like a joke, but he continued talking. Thank you very much, I guess I feel a little better now. I do what I can. And you do it well. I hesitated to call you before, I know you don't like to talk about these things and I didn't want to put a burden on you. Sheet. Katsuki looked away for a few seconds. Even with all this time, Izuku still doubted whether he could trust him to tell him this kind of things. What was the point of having had all that closeness with him after the war, the nights sharing a bed, the lunches at the UA, the extra training sessions? For him they had been really important, he believed they were a good step forward, and he thought Izuku thought that way too. Perhaps the mistake had been not giving him the verbal tuning that they were making progress. What the F dash? Katsuki invited him to create an hero agency together and Izuku rejected him before leaving abroad. Katsuki slept in his same bed. Katsuki hugged him first upon leaving. Furthermore, Katsuki was the only one of his friends who accompanied him to take the flight that took him to the United States for 2 years. Well, 3 now, it was really annoying. Everything he did from the heart and with a lot of effort. He's going to beat the hell out of that idiot when he sees him. Listen to me, idiot. With just that little phrase he caught the boy's attention, who quickly looked at him in surprise. I don't know where the hell you get those hypotheses from, but I haven't told you to F off yet. It wasn't the best declaration of friendship, or whatever he was trying to do with him. Katsuki had to somehow let him know that he wanted him there in his life and get those FING doubts out of his head. Because he doesn't care, he loves him so much and he always had him in mind. At some point in his life he wanted to push him away. It always happens and he prayed for the day when Izuku wouldn't be in his way. That was before everything he had lived through, before his memories were filled with so many times when he had to spit in his face that he loved him. That was so many years ago before he decided to sacrifice his life full of comfort and luxury to send 50% of his salary so that both could fulfill that dream together, the idea of fighting side by side, together for world peace, to reduce villainy, to improve society. To fight and outdo each other the way it's meant to be. Because even if in the past nothing had gone as planned, now it was going to change. So if you ever have a problem, no matter how small, don't be an idiot and tell me, because whatever the F you say, I'll be able to handle it. Don't underestimate me, little sheet. Izuku, for his part, seemed somewhat surprised by what was happening, but his face still reflected a more beautiful glow. His lips parted, surely letting out a soft but heavy breath at the same time before letting out a mini tear that he wiped with his clothes. I promise to do it, Kaken. I know you're the best. And yes. The call dragged on a little longer than either of them expected. Izuku spoke about the kids at school, the stupid things they said when they tried to imitate heroes, and Katsuki mocked him for sounding like an old man. Katsuki, on his side, rambled about his cooking disasters, and Izuku laughed through his still wet eyes. Eventually, silence fell not uncomfortable, but heavy, like both knew they'd already said what mattered. Katsuki leaned back, staring at the faint reflection of himself on the laptop screen, then at the idiot still waiting on the other side. "Get some sleep, nerd. You look like shit." He said this with real concern, because it must be quite late in the other boy's part of the world, and if he doesn't take care of his sleep schedule, things will go badly for him. Katsuki knows this from experience of himself. Izuku smiled faintly, eyes closing just a little. "All right, good night, Kaken." "Good night, my butt, it's morning here." Izuku laughed softly, the kind of laugh that said he was lighter now, not fixed but patched enough to hold until the next time. "Good morning." Katsuki wanted to end the call right there, but instead he let his finger hover above the button for a few seconds longer. He watched Izuku's face, dimly lit by the screen, fragile but stubborn, homesick and still fighting. He'd never say it out loud, but hell, he was proud of him. And before he could stop himself, he muttered low enough that only Izuku, if he was paying attention, could catch it. "Don't make me wait too long, nerd." The call ended, leaving the room quiet except for the faint buzz of his laptop and the city waking outside his window. Katsuki stared at the black screen, the ghost of Izuku's smile still burned in his mind. He sighed, shoved another bite of cold udon into his mouth and smirked. He could wait a little longer. Katsuki shut the laptop and the room went dark, leaving him face to face with his own reflection in the black screen. He hated that seeing himself worn out, restless, not the hero everyone pictured. He dropped onto the bed without even changing, staring at the ceiling like it had all the answers. Sleep wouldn't come easy, it never did when his head was full of Izuku. The DMN suit. His secret project, the thing he kept pouring his savings and sleepless nights into. He wanted it ready by the time that nerd came back. Not just as gear, but as proof that Bakugo Katsuki could give him something solid, something that said, "You still belong here." But the thought burned. What if Izuku didn't care? What if it wasn't enough? He buried his face into the pillow, groaning. 5 years isn't shit. He muttered, like a mantra he didn't quite believe. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by his own uneven breathing. Every time his eyes slipped shut, he saw it again. Izuku opening the box, smiling like an idiot, or worse, looking away like it meant nothing. Anxiety chewed at him even in sleep, leaving him restless, sweaty, heart pounding. Still, he clung to the vision. 5 years weren't nothing, but they'd pass. And when they did, he'd be standing there with that suit in his hands. Waiting had never been his style, but for Izuku, yeah, he could endure it. Being part of society, especially as a public figure, always brought a double-edged sword: good things that shone like gold in the daylight, and bad things that clung to him in the dark. On the bright side, the photo sessions with the Daisente brand were filling his pockets with more money than he had ever expected. That kind of money meant security, meant he could buy things he never thought he would care about, and sometimes, it simply made him look great on paper. But the downside was always lurking just around the corner, the massive billboards plastered across Shibuya and Shinjuku, glowing at night under neon lights, displaying his face like a product. Seeing himself printed that larger than life, was horrendous. It felt fake, sterile. It had nothing to do with being a hero, nothing to do with saving lives. Just plastic smiles, posed angles, and cheap perfume drifting from store entrances. And then came the real torment. Months and months of enduring questions that had nothing to do with his actual work. Interviews where he could smell the powdery foundation of the host sitting across from him, where the lights overhead were so bright and hot they made the room reek faintly of burning wires. He could save an entire building from collapse, dragging civilians through smoke that stung his eyes and burned his lungs, but none of it mattered. The next day's headlines would be about whether he was considering joining another brand, or if he had been invited to Fashion Week. Fame, money, or something else? That's all he ever got asked, stupidly, day after every villain capture during his patrols. He was starting to get fed up, to the point where his tongue itched with curses he had to bite down on. He knew better. He knew that if he told them all to F off, it would backfire. Self-control had never been his strong suit, And every day was another exhausting fight not to spit in some reporter's face when they shoved a microphone under his nose. Nobody seemed to value the work itself. The only days when the world felt quieter, tolerable even, were when the pink-haired fool dragged him to her agency. The blonde Yankee had sent another piece of the prototype, and those trips always carried a strange sense of relief. The agency halls smelled faintly of disinfectant and printer ink, and when he entered the lab spaces, it was a different story, metallic, chemical, sometimes sharp enough to sting the back of his throat. But in those rooms, with sketches, gadgets, and samples laid out across white tables, he felt something like happiness. Every new device, even ones he barely understood like those odd cellular regenerators for skin, felt like another step toward the goal. He didn't even know why they insisted on seeing him monthly, but he went anyway. At least it gave him something to look forward to. Life outside of that was just waiting. Waiting and putting up with reporters who seemed determined to carve pieces out of him. Even on his way home, with his backpack weighing heavy on one shoulder, feet dragging after a long patrol, he couldn't escape them. His head was already occupied with simpler thoughts: what to cook, whether he still had miso left, how much rice was left in the container. But before he could step away from the agency doors, a woman with too bright lipstick appeared, dragging a cameraman behind her. "Will you be signing with another brand? When are you opening your own hero company?" He caught only fragments. The rest was lost to the city noise, the hum of traffic, the sharp hiss of a bus's brakes, the chatter of pedestrians moving in waves around them. He did the only thing left to preserve his humanity, pulled out his headphones, shoved them in his pocket, and pretended not to hear her shrill voice. His hearing wasn't what it used to be anyway, and for once, he was grateful. So maybe he was rude today. Who cared? Everyone already knew what kind of hero he was: blunt, rough, no sugarcoating. If they didn't like it, too bad. There were more important things waiting for him, like making it home early enough to crash. Tomorrow he finally had a day off, and that meant one thing: buying the car he had been saving for. That thought alone put a rare, small spark of happiness in his chest. On the way back, he stopped at a convenience store under buzzing fluorescent lights. The place smelled of fried food and cheap plastic packaging. He picked up a bag of rice, the good kind was sold out, and a few vegetables that still looked fresh enough. The clerk barely glanced at him as he paid. Then he walked the rest of the way home under the fading light of dusk, the sky painted with streaks of pink and orange that reflected in puddles left from a quick shower earlier. Once inside, everything went on autopilot. Shoes off by the door, backpack dumped on the floor, rice stored, vegetables rinsed. He ate quickly, not even remembering the taste, and then collapsed into bed. The pillow smelled faintly of detergent, the mattress was lumpy, and he knew in a minute that his next big expense had to be a new bed. His back was already protesting. Morning came with a softer light sneaking through the blinds. He brewed coffee strong enough to sting his nose, showered, threw on casual clothes, and headed out. The dealership was far, but he didn't mind. The train carried him past crowded stations, the air heavy with the scent of coffee, exhaust, and people's morning rush. The dealership itself was something else. 3 whole floors of gleaming cars behind glass panels that sparkled like jewels under the morning sun. Even the air inside smelled different: polished leather, wax, something cold and expensive. He wasn't the kind of guy who worshipped cars, but he wasn't ignorant either. He knew enough to argue about a Porsche versus a Ferrari, if pressed. Still, he let the salesman lead the way. After all, this was the kind of thing he had been waiting for. After seeing several cars that were beyond his budget, Katsuki knew he couldn't afford to spend more than he had saved, just on a whim. Being selfish is okay sometimes. Treating yourself was like pampering your inner child who always wanted a cool car when he could afford it. But those dreams are also nonsense that can be dismissed, so he simply asked to be shown the used models. The salesman happily took him downstairs, where they had equally prestigious cars that had once had owners. Luckily for the blonde, one immediately caught his eye since he recognized it from having seen it a couple of times on his cell phone. A dark gray Porsche Macan, like a classic among classics. Since Katsuki isn't a person who thinks a million times when he finds out the price and just buys it, it was great for him because he even had a little bit of his savings left over that he could then put into the suit they made for Izuku. It was great, the real win-win. Although good things always come to an end. Because even if he had the car he wanted, it wasn't so great to return to his apartment and see the dampness spreading across the walls again. Katsuki is someone with misplaced priorities apparently, because he thought that buying a car would be 1,000 times better than getting a decent apartment. Well, he shouldn't be classist either. People live in even worse conditions and he's there because of his own idiocy, so he should put up with it for being an idiot. And as he left all his things, including the house keys, headphones, and new car keys on the table, he decided to turn on the television and watch the news just for a bit of entertainment. Anyway, he wasn't going to give it that much attention since he had planned to start making food. Unfortunately, something did catch his attention. Katsuki flicked on the TV as he ate his late breakfast, the smell of miso soup and sizzling vegetables filling the tiny apartment. The corner of the screen glared like it always did, the morning news showing footage of him landing on top of a burning building, people cheering below, the chaos barely contained. But of course, the segment didn't focus on the rescue. It focused on him. The anchors, sitting behind polished desks with two bright studio lights making the sweat on their foreheads glint like cheap diamonds, were dissecting his every move. Some might call it heroism, one said, voice dripping with faux sincerity, but when you look closer, can we really trust someone who seems to chase fame and money with every action? Another anchor nodded, flicking through images of him in decente ads, neon lights reflecting off the glossy billboards he'd hoped to ignore. Exactly. And what about these volunteer appearances? Conveniently photographed, carefully timed, it all looks suspiciously orchestrated. Can a hero whose schedule is this meticulously managed be entirely selfless? Katsuki's jaw tightened. He could hear the faint hiss of the kettle behind him, the city's morning hum outside the window, but all of it faded under the thrum of his irritation. He pressed his fingers against the table, digging into the wood until his nails threatened to break the surface. Look at this, the first anchor continued, pointing to footage of him handing out aid kits. Notice the camera angles. Every smile captured perfectly, almost as if someone wanted us to see it, to believe he's doing this out of altruism. Katsuki snorted. Yeah, because every act of help has to be broadcasted for people like you to think it's real, he muttered under his breath, the words tasting bitter in his own mouth. He wanted to throw something at the screen, maybe kick the TV stand, but he kept it together. The reporters continued, voices overlapping in a symphony of speculation. We have to ask ourselves, does Dynamite really do this for justice, or is it just another publicity stunt? His sponsorships tell us he's making a lot more money than an average hero. Is hero work just a side job? And these constant appearances, why now? Could he be hiding something? Every accusation was like a small punch to his gut. Katsuki had saved lives without a thought for glory, without caring whether a camera caught it. And now some idiot sitting in a studio, drinking cheap coffee and smelling of hairspray and stale air conditioning, dared to question his integrity? He could feel the heat in his face, the tension in his shoulders, and for a moment, it was almost comforting to let the anger simmer quietly instead of exploding. Because that was the thing about being a public figure in Japan, no matter how many buildings you saved, how many people you helped, or how much effort you poured into something as small as a volunteer event, there would always be someone ready to twist it into a story of greed, manipulation, or deceit. And Katsuki? He was done explaining himself. What the hell did all those reporters know? Absolutely nothing, but they did feel they had the right to speak badly about his life, when he himself knows that some of his actions are pointless, because why would he want a luxury car? His own pleasure, yes. But everything else, all the unnecessary effort and exploitation of his own body, he does it so he can get something for Izuku, something that tells him he can still be a hero. Besides, what the hell? He can be a kind soul and do volunteer work if he wants. Screw everyone, I ended up turning off the FING television because I was starting to get tired. People can talk about whatever they want if it makes them happy with their shitty lives. He knows himself, he is calm in his subconscious. He ended up sitting down with his fried rice omelette with vegetables and egg to sit in front of his laptop. Normally, he doesn't use his cell phone much. He's like those old people out of technology and you are not interested in knowing much about it. They are useful and it's great, but that's it. How could he have listened to the messages anyway if he didn't have his headphones on? He only realized an hour later that several of his friends had texted him about what had happened on the news. Kirishima seemed concerned about the way he told him not to worry about what others say. He ignored it. He doesn't want to talk to anyone, as always. But among all that he found a chat, the only one that wasn't muted. Izuku. Holy crap, was that nerd more up-to-date on news from Japan than from the country he was in? Or had he had another identity crisis? Lately they were very present in calls or messages, more than usual, but he already told her that she can write to him anything. He was really the only one I tolerated. More than others. You don't know what happened to me yesterday. I was walking down the street to teach elementary school, and a group of kids playing hit their ball into me. They were very sweet and one girl recognized me. She even called me Deku and asked for my autograph. You know the best part? It had been a message from several hours ago. He didn't see it because it was the first time that day he had picked up his cell phone. Katsuki was somewhat confused by the time. He probably wrote it in the early morning since that's the time when they're both usually awake. Although he answered now, he doesn't expect Izuku to be awake at 12 at night, or maybe he is. Kaken. I have no idea, a nerd. And while he was taking a couple of bites of his late breakfast to enjoy the taste of a balanced meal, he saw his cell phone light up again. They asked me about you. They say they like watching videos of the war and how we both fought together. The girl says we smiled a lot even at a time like that and that she wants to be such a cool hero like you. Kaken. Dean Izuku, are you saying this as a lie to make me feel better about today's news? It didn't seem like such a crazy idea to him. Izuku used to be co-sympathetic with him, and in order not to show his real pain or concern, he would look around to find out what the topic was about and suggest something contrary. He always did this as if the blonde didn't realize what he was doing, and normally he didn't give it any importance and let him get away with it. Today Katsuki is angrier than usual. News? I haven't seen the news. I was working until you just wrote. A few seconds passed. Perhaps he had gone to read the aforementioned news. I just saw them. They're idiots. Kaken. Don't lie to me to make me feel good. I swear I didn't know. I just wanted to share something that made me happy yesterday. Those kids seemed really happy and they're not even from there. Think about how far our actions reached. Katsuki exhaled, letting some of the tension in his shoulders ease. He could feel the warmth of the morning creeping through the apartment. The faint aroma of leftover coffee mixing with the faint tang of laundry detergent from yesterday's wash. Despite himself, a small, grudging smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That you're impossible, he muttered, shaking his head. But deep down, he couldn't deny it, knowing the nerd cared enough to notice, even across oceans, softened the edge of the morning. He shoved his phone back into his pocket, the screen still warm against his palm, and let himself focus on something real for a moment. The quiet morning, the sun climbing slowly over the city, the simple satisfaction of breakfast still lingering in his mouth. For now, that was enough. He had had enough of Izuku's affection, and with this new information, well, it altered something inside him. He knows he does things right, that sometimes he has some ambitions of his own, but after all, his greatest wish and the reason why he does so many things is for Izuku. If everyone knew that they give their energy, time and money thinking 24 hours a day about the object of their affection, everyone would change their minds easily. After eating and sentencing himself to death, he knew it. He knows he misses Izuku's presence by his side more and more every day. Perhaps he was now sensitive for various reasons, the attacks on his person, Izuku's message, or even had questionable emotions about having achieved his goal of the car he always wanted. He looked around at his shitty apartment. Did he really give it all up for the desire of 2 kids? He did it, didn't? All these years he's done everything like a shadow of how magnificent Izuku is. He even keeps the newspaper clippings where they both appeared together, because even back then, he didn't feel like he'd even come close to what the boy could be. He clung to the last time they'd felt epic together. Yes, there were more situations after the war. The internships as heroes filled them with anecdotes together, and most of them are full of laughter, but that's why so many miss him now. He got so carried away by emotions that he doesn't know when he found himself wrapped up in his bed looking at the cell phone screen with Izuku's chat there. The nerd writes with such affection, with silly emojis for an adult, photos of what he did, what he ate, new anecdotes about his little brat students. even if they tried to keep the touch. It wasn't the same. If Katsuki wanted to hit him, he had to save his desire for when he saw him again. Was he going to hold out for a few more months? He has no idea about that. Sadness clouded him for once in his life. He didn't even cry when Izuku left because he thought it was idiotic to cry over something like that. In the past, when he saw Izuku leave with all might to another continent, Katsuki thought that those 2 years would pass very quickly and he wouldn't even notice the absence of his nerd. Now it hurt like hell not being able to see him every day. He'll be back soon, he has to, and Katsuki told himself that he was going to do everything possible to at least see his face for 5 minutes a day in person, even if that meant leaving this anguish of his heart, his weak heart pumping with pain. Since when is he a weak, sentimental one? Since he understood how much he loves Izuku. Waiting was terrible. The days didn't pass any faster, no matter how hard he tried to push them along, and the sunlight crawling slowly across the walls of his apartment seemed to mock him every morning. The ticking of the clock was relentless, and even when he closed his eyes, it felt as if time refused to bend to his impatience. Everyday tasks felt like filler mindless repetitions that dulled the edges of his thoughts but never quite distracted him. Sitting at his cluttered desk, filling out necessary paperwork while the faint smell of coffee from the corner of the room mingled with the lingering scent of old laundry. Walking the streets, checking that everything was in order, the faint hum of cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant barking of a dog in some alley, the occasional smell of fried food from a corner stand it all blended into a monotonous blur. Even posing for a photographer, following instructions about angles and posture, felt like a mechanical exercise rather than an accomplishment. Sometimes all that remained was slipping into automatic mode, letting his limbs move without thought while his mind wandered into the void that slowly formed inside him. That was how Katsuki was living. He tried to immerse himself completely in his work, digging into each patrol, each small hero task, so that the emptiness wouldn't devour him. And when he couldn't, he let himself be pulled into outings with his friends, accepting invitations he would have previously declined. It was better to be distracted by noisy banter and careless laughter than to sit alone in his dim, poorly ventilated apartment, the faint smell of stale air mixing with the lingering scent of cooking oils and detergent. The worst part was that he often ended up chauffeuring them around in his car, begrudgingly giving rides because none of the idiots could navigate the city alone, and he wasn't in a bad enough mood to refuse. If an old grandfather's proverb applied, he'd be the sleeping shrimp carried along by the current. Still, he had to admit there was a strange comfort in the chaos. Being around those idiots, hearing their pointless arguments and jokes, even their ridiculous rivalries, kept the emptiness at bay. For once, he found some solace in filling his head with nonsense rather than letting silence stretch its claws through his thoughts. That was why, when group missions came up and Dynamite requested his presence, he no longer refused outright. Tasks that used to feel forced now had a subtle enjoyment tucked inside, a faint satisfaction in seeing his friends scramble and bicker while he maintained his usual scowl. Who would have thought that laughing at Icy Hot, seeing him trip over his own ego, could be so entertaining? Katsuki had underestimated the small joys hidden in these moments. Yet no amount of camaraderie could fill the void left by Izuku's absence. Every message from him was a sharp reminder of that emptiness, and Katsuki's reaction had become something of a joke among his friends. "Bro, I'm telling you, if Bakugo gets rejected, the rest of us have no chance with anyone," Kaminari would say, laughing like a fool, eyes sparkling with amusement. The comment stung because it was true. Katsuki was an idiot about his feelings, fragile and stubborn in ways no one else seemed to understand. And the blonde never spared Kaminari from a verbal hit. "You have no f***ing idea what you're talking about, so shut the F up." His voice carried that edge of exasperation, mixed with the tiny thrill of being challenged by someone he knew would never really push him too far. The rest of the group laughed, oblivious, filling the room with their careless joy, the faint scent of sweat and sunscreen from training lingering in the background. The dynamic, chaotic and irritating as it was, brightened his days more than he would ever admit. Even if he wore a scowl and muttered complaints under his breath, there was a subtle warmth in those interactions, a reminder that the world wasn't entirely empty without Izuku. And still, the messages kept coming, little threads tying him to the nerd across the ocean. Every buzz of the phone was a dagger of longing, but also a tether he could cling to. Katsuki sighed, running a hand over his face. Somehow, in all the chaos, the monotony, and the small absurdities of his friend's antics, life moved forward. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep him sane. For now. So it wasn't that complicated to spend the days this way, even the days when more artifacts for Izuku's suit arrived and it was entertaining to go do important tests. They had even started calling other heroes from Izuku's class, those with whom he often trained in the use of his other quirks. It's that they had come to a conclusion when making the plans for the suit. It was basically impossible for one for all to let out his other quirks again. While he still has the essence of hitting power and strength that he can use, there's not much chance of him recovering everything else. But hey, it was worse than nothing, and Izuku is such a good hero that he would know how to manage to use the suit to his advantage the first few months before his own body improves. Even when the anticipation of seeing Izuku again corroded him from the inside, he held himself together. He didn't allow the worry to show in public. Instead, he focused on the small, tangible things: the perfect angle of a pose in front of the camera, the balance of ingredients in a stew, the precise timing of a patrol sweep. Every task completed was a reminder that he could control something in his life, even if the thought of the nerd waiting for him across the ocean made his chest tight. Messages still came intermittently from Izuku, little sparks of connection, a text to check in, a small joke, a smiley face. But the weekly calls they used to have had fallen by the wayside. Both were too busy, too entangled in their lives, and the gaps between messages stretched longer than either liked. Katsuki didn't dwell on it too much, though. He told himself that 5 years wasn't a lifetime, that the time apart was nothing compared to what awaited him when they finally saw each other again. Then one night, after finishing a particularly grueling mission together, a damaged office building, a few trapped civilians, and a villain subdued with perfect coordination, Katsuki joined Uraraka, Mina, and Kirishima on the way back to their dorms. The streets smelled faintly of rain, asphalt, and fried street food from the nearby stalls, the city lights reflecting on puddles and casting neon streaks across the sidewalks. Uraraka bounced slightly on her heels, grinning like a child who knew a secret. Bakugo must be the most excited about this. Deku's coming back. He said he lands early Monday morning. Katsuki froze mid-step, the strap of his hero gear digging into his shoulder without registering. His stomach dropped. He had no idea. What? Izuku had kept that from him? The nerd had deliberately hidden it? A tangle of thoughts collided in his head. Had he messed up? Maybe not messaging Izuku for the past couple of months made the nerd think he didn't want to see him. Maybe all the restraint, the silence, the carefully measured distance Katsuki had maintained had been misinterpreted. He didn't tell me, Katsuki muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. The words carried a weight he hadn't expected. Uraraka immediately stepped forward, looking guilty. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Bakugo. I didn't mean to." Kirishima held up a hand, grinning despite the situation. "It's fine, bro, don't worry. Maybe Midoriya was planning a surprise or something. You know him, he probably wanted to make it special. So he didn't say anything." Katsuki's jaw clenched, but a small part of him eased. The surprise? For him? His chest tightened with a mixture of relief, irritation, and anticipation. That DMN nerd had always done things his own way. He exhaled sharply, forcing his anger down and letting the tension in his shoulders loosen just a fraction. Figures. He tried to sound nonchalant, but the smallest edge of a grin tugged at his lips. The city hummed around them, rain-slicked streets glowing under the streetlights. Katsuki's thoughts were a storm of his own, making worry, excitement, guilt, and anticipation all tangled together, but one thing was certain. Come Monday, he was going to see Izuku again. And damn it, he wasn't letting a single second of that moment go to waste. Returning home, Katsuki couldn't stop turning everything over in his mind. The thought gnawed at him: had he messed things up with Izuku? But then again, if the nerd had kept something from him, there had to be a reason. A good reason, one that Katsuki wasn't meant to understand yet. So he pushed the worry aside and continued with his life. 2 days, that's all. If Izuku returned and hadn't said anything, Katsuki reasoned, there had to be a motive behind it. He didn't well, he had too much to do, too much routine to maintain. Unfortunately, the two of them didn't cross paths, and it, Katsuki's patience was tested further when the evening news finally caught his attention. The screen flickered in his modest apartment, the pale glow illuminating the faint mildew stain creeping along the corner of the wall. The hero Deku, the symbol of hope, had returned to the country. Not just that, he had already been accepted at UA as a teacher for the upcoming class. Katsuki's hands tightened as he read the scrolling text on the screen, the familiar pang of concern mixing with pride and irritation. He was cooking dinner at the same time, a pot of spicy curry simmering on the stove. The scent of roasted vegetables, garlic, and chili filled the air, weaving with the faint smell of old detergent still lingering from his laundry. Steam rose and curled toward the ceiling, blurring the edges of the small television screen. His not-so-big TV perched precariously on a stack of books, buzzing with the news anchor's monotone voices. Katsuki didn't even have his headphones on, and though most of the words were muffled, he caught enough to know the headlines. Then came the vibrations, faint but insistent, of the intercom outside his apartment door. Katsuki frowned, wiping his hands on a towel that smelled faintly of curry, and muttered under his breath, "Who the hell would be coming by at this hour?" He stepped toward the door, the floorboards creaking under his weight, curry still simmering behind him and the spicy aroma mixing with the lingering scent of the city rain wafting in through the slightly cracked window. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Visitors at this hour were never good news. And yet, a small, unreasonably stubborn part of him felt a spark of anticipation. He pressed the intercom button, listening to the click of the connection, the faint echo of someone speaking on the other side, his heart thumping just a little faster than it should. Something told him this wasn't a normal visitor. Who is bothering? No, he didn't tend to be nice to his neighbors or anyone when he wasn't working. There was no FNG need to be fake, and at this hour it was really annoying. But the voice on the other end seemed hesitant to speak. "Hey Kaken, can I come in?" There was a somewhat awkward silence as Katsuki stared at the department's answering machine as if it were haunted. Was this what he wanted? But could he afford to be a little brusque and selfish right now? I mean, Izuku seemed to be hiding something from him when he arrived, and now he appears. Katsuki have the right to claim. No, he can think of anything else to say. "Kaken please, I have a good excuse." "I'm sure you're a nerd, but I don't want to hear it, go away." From the other end of the line a sigh was heard with a slight laugh. "I brought cheesecake. How to resist that? Come in before I change my mind." After hanging up the phone, he touched the button on the wall, the one that opens the door to the building so they can get in. It normally takes 5 minutes to get to Katsuki's 10th floor by elevator, so he took those seconds to turn off the heat of his food and instantly it stopped boiling. The bubbles would no longer release that delicious aroma. And right there, through the door as if it were his FNG house, Izuku walked in with a huge box from some bakery. Don't kid yourself, Katsuki loves cheesecake and hasn't had it in 2 years. Likewise, upon seeing him, she simply crossed her arms behind the kitchen counter and watched him enter. This was the moment she dreamed of every night, and anyway, he wasn't really there, it was a vile lie. He just has his feelings scrambled in a pan like when you add 1,000 things to eggs. On the one hand, happiness. He wanted to run and hug him, then kneel and beg him never to dare leave him for so many years again. 3 years, 3 FING years. On the other hand, he wanted to beat him up, slit his throat, and throw him out the window with an explosion because he dared to come back without even seeing him after everything they had been through together. But his kinder side always won. He wasn't going to do any of those things, he just held back the urge to cry in his chest, the hatred and the pain. It can't be hypocrite and judge Izuku for keeping a little secret when Katsuki himself is keeping the biggest secret of all. It would be wrong, but he still wants to play angry for a while. "Your excuse, right now," Kat said as watched Izuku place the box on the dining room table. Thank God he wasn't looking around to notice how disgusting the place was. And his face reflected a certain affection. "I wanted to make a surprise, but a couple of things came up and in the end I was busy all week. But your mom gave me the address and well, I came." The old witch. Katsuki had been careful for a long time not to tell Izuku where he lived so he wouldn't have to worry about his money or why he was living in such a low place. But here he was. All his effort in the trash. And according to your stupid brain, what surprise did you want to give me? I don't know, I was planning to go see you while you were working, but when my time was extended I found out that you already knew I was here, and if you wanted to yell at me or hit me, doing it in public wouldn't be cool, so I came here. For a second Katsuki kept his face stoic, but it was just a facade. He couldn't stand it anymore. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, he said before taking a couple of steps towards Izuku. Didn't it occur to you that I would have liked to know that you were here coming from your mouth and not from the news? I thought about it, yes, but as I told you, my plan was ruined. His voice was a little painful to hear, and difficult because Katsuki still didn't have his hearing aids, but he managed to understand. Finally a hand melted into the boy's green curls, pulling harder than it should. But not only did his hands hurt, he used it to force Izuku to approach him and wrap him in a short hug. I'm sorry. You must have thought I didn't want to see you, Izuku said, wrapping his arms around Katsuki's body, feeling both of their hearts beat faster. He doesn't even have time to think that this is a little out of the ordinary for the two of them. They hadn't seen each other for 3 years and all they wanted was this. Nothing mattered more than their desire to see each other again, to feel that old connection again. But the biggest fear here was, how many more had been like this with Izuku? How many were actually happy to see him and gave him a big hug? It bothered him because for Katsuki, Izuku he was unique, he was his special bond and he valued him more than anyone else in the world. So he did give him the special treatment he deserved in that regard. He let him into his house, he talked to him often, he answered his messages, they had calls, he bought a FING sheep keychain for him. Worst of all, he would leave his hatred for physical contact to give the idiot nerd a hug. A FING hug. Call him jealous for nothing, but when something really matters to you, you want it to be yours, to be reciprocated. Shut up once and for all, Katsuki said as he wrapped his arms around the boy's shoulders. Was he taller? Because he had no trouble making room on his shoulder to hide his face. Somehow he didn't want to show how sad he was. While the hug lingered, Izuku couldn't stop thinking about how much he had missed him. Every subtle movement, every familiar warmth, every heartbeat pressed against his own reminded him of how much time had passed, and yet, how nothing had really changed between them. He felt a mix of relief and guilt, relief that Katsuki was really here, and guilt for all the moments he hadn't been able to share, all the times he had worried Katsuki might feel forgotten. And yet, in that moment, all doubts melted. Being pressed against Katsuki's chest, hearing his steady breathing, feeling the quiet strength beneath the occasional twitch of impatience, it was enough. It was more than enough. He silently promised himself that he wouldn't let another year pass without showing him just how much he had mattered, just how much he still mattered. I missed this. I couldn't have stayed there longer. Of course, Izuku missed the warmth of what was familiar, of his culture. Did he miss Katsuki? It was ridiculous to think that. But he still wanted to hold on to the idea that maybe he loved him a little more than others, more important to him than his other friends. He moved away a little, and to avoid them seeing the small tears that came out of his eyes he looked away, wiping them with the sleeve of his clothes. Don't go away then, idiot. Kakin, you're crying. Izuku told him without letting go of the hug on either side of the other boy, finally taking his hand to make them look into each other's eyes. It's your fault, it's always your fault. A slap to Izuku's other hand helped Katsuki move away a little. He needed space to breathe for a few seconds. And Izuku respected that. In a certain way I deserve it, I'm sorry. I can leave you the cheesecake and go if you want. No, he said hurriedly before turning around again and realizing his obvious urgency to have him there. It's late, it's dangerous here. You stay for lunch. If I stay to eat it will be later, Izuku says with some grace. But I would like to, I missed your food. Then stay, a minute. It wasn't difficult for Katsuki to get back to making food, even though it was just one dish for him. He could quickly make a little more rice and add chicken so they would both be full. So he got to it. Cooking served to distract his nerves a little, his hands moved as if it were the first time they had seen each other. In a way it was, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Katsuki can't remember the last time he got nervous for a mission at work, So this was totally ridiculous. It's just Izuku. Izuku he's been in love with for years. Izuku he hasn't seen for so long. Izuku he'd want to see every day from now on. He should start some kind of conversation to make them both comfortable, but he couldn't think of much beyond sighing and inhaling air to relax his heart. Remembering that he doesn't have the hearing aid, he looked for it before Izuku continued talking. So, professor at the UA. Yes. It was the goal from the beginning, but I'm really glad I achieved it. Izuku sat down in one of the dining room chairs. For once it's good that the place is small so he can easily converse up close. Katsuki divides what he had cooked into 2 plates. All that was left was to wait for the rice to finish cooking. I don't understand how you would want to put up with a 15-year-old brat playing at being a hero. You talk as if we hadn't been in that place. Katsuki looks at him before lifting both plates to take them to the table. I say this because I lived it. We were unbearable, Izuku. Which gave him a couple of chuckles from the boy. Well, you're right, I've often put my foot in it where I shouldn't have. That almost killed you. He says that, contrary to what people think, he was one of those who went to sleep at 8 and had good grades. I don't know how Aizawa didn't quit his job during our first year. He wanted to stay with us until we graduated. He's a good teacher. With food on the table, it wasn't difficult for them to start eating together. Several memories came to mind, like when they shared a meal together in the UA dorms, or when on days when he saw Izuku feeling down would make him katsudon, which was his favorite. The 2 boys found some peace here. It was like a little step further from the usual, what they were used to. It felt good if he ignored the pain and pangs in his heart. Now I also know how to teach them. I learned a lot about that in the United States. I hope it goes well. It will be fine, and if not you can always kick them out. Izuku, who was eating a spoonful, covered his mouth before laughing a little. I'm not going to kick them out. The blonde shrugged because for him it had been a very good idea, but there was the difference. Izuku would give thousands of opportunities to his students while he would send them to hell if they weren't useful the first time. They're under the excuse that we need real heroes, not little kids who think it's just a game and it's fun. I know there are capable children out there, good heroes. You're pure faith, nerd. Maybe, he says, laughing a little about it. For some reason he was the symbol of hope for all of Japan. If he is there are ways to save ourselves. And you are a model from what I see. Katsuki's plate made a noise when he hit it with his chopsticks. Upon hearing that, he looked at his companion with a frown at the audacity of those words. He remembered not telling him much about it. Izuku probably knew something but didn't say anything until now, that JRK. If you're going to make fun of it, go ahead. Izuku can't help but laugh a little. I wasn't going to make fun of you. You look good and I think it's a good way to connect with people. Many teenage girls seem happy. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Just what I needed, a bunch of hormonally addled little girls after me. You like attention. When they flatter me that I saved a FING building from killing hundreds, not when shorts fit me well. Daigu, just thinking about it makes Katsuki's skin crawl. He never gave importance to relationships of that kind. He doesn't want that kind of attention. Not when he was already in love with someone. He just has that need for Izuku's attention. He wants him to see him in all the best ways. The plates were starting to run low. Perhaps they were both hungrier than they looked. Anyway, you're doing well, huh? Not much news was getting there and there isn't much online, but I guess you're on everyone's lips. Yes, they wonder how shameless and hypocritical I am to do overtime and volunteer work to buy a car. You know it's not true. Izuku seemed even more frustrated than him about that matter. The pay attributed to that is just an extra point. I know you have a reason and that you like to help. That was his nerd. That was Izuku, the one who knows him better than anyone. Even if he doesn't try hard to do so, it just comes naturally to him. Obviously you're nerdy but would understand that. Well, I know you, Kaken, and I know you wouldn't do something you didn't want or support just because. Katsuki ran his tongue along the inside of his cheek, somewhat nervous about the conversation. Seriously, was this what they were going to discuss for the first time in years? Receiving that kind of compliment is something that certainly makes Katsuki nervous, especially when it comes from this idiot. Then he little laugh, smiling. Thank you, now open that cheesecake. It was fun to have him back there, because contrary to expectations, they could talk about anything without thinking that it would be awkward. One silly topic after another, all at once. Dinner faded into cheesecake, and then into conversation that stretched longer than either of them had expected. They traded stories that couldn't be told through a phone screen, the ones too heavy for short calls, or too delicate to share with a bad signal in the middle of the night. Izuku laughed harder than he thought he would. Katsuki rolled his eyes more than once, but neither could hide the comfort of slipping back into something so familiar. Even after 3 years, it was disturbingly easy, like no time had passed at all. When the plates were cleared, Izuku immediately stood, insisting on washing the dishes. Katsuki muttered a curse but let him, leaning back against the counter, watching him like some bizarre domestic scene out of a dream. When the last dish clinked into the drying rack, Katsuki had already dragged a futon out from the closet and tossed it onto the bedroom floor. "Don't argue," he said before Izuku could even open his mouth. "You're staying. This neighborhood's sheet at night, and I'm not letting you walk back." It was the perfect excuse to keep him close, to not let go just yet. Izuku only smiled, a little tired, a little relieved, and nodded. As Katsuki switched off the lights and the apartment fell into quiet shadows, he couldn't help but think that maybe things didn't have to be so DMN heavy anymore. Maybe with Izuku back, with the two of them breathing the same air again, life could be something softer, something worth holding on to. Together, everything might finally feel a little lighter, a little brighter, more beautiful than it had in years.